The platform emptied slowly, like water draining from a cracked basin. Families reunited. Cargo was loaded onto wagons. The depot master locked the ticket window. And still Eliza stood there, carpet bag at her feet, hands clasped in front of her to stop their shaking. She'd sold everything she owned to come here. The boarding house in Philadelphia where she'd worked for 18 years. Her mother's china. The piano she'd learned on as a girl. All of it liquidated, converted into a single train ticket west and the clothes on her back. For what? For letters written in careful penmanship by a man named Gerald Hutchins. Letters that spoke of hard work, yes, but also of companionship, of building something together on land that stretched farther than the eye could see. He'd never promised romance, she was long past expecting that, but he'd promised respect, partnership, a place to belong. You're too small. 4 words. That's all it had taken to reduce her entire future to ash. A gust of wind rattled the platform awning. Eliza picked up her bag, lighter than it should be, lighter than a life reduced to essentials, and started walking. She had no destination. The town of Cheyenne sprawled before her, unfamiliar and indifferent. False-fronted buildings, mud streets churned by wagon wheels, men in dusty hats who glanced at her once, then away, as if single women of a certain age became invisible through some natural law. She passed a general store, a saloon with painted letters peeling in the sun, a land office with maps tacked to the window. Each doorway felt like a question she didn't know how to ask. How do you start over when you have nothing? Where do you sleep when you can't afford a room? What do you eat when your purse holds $3.20? The depot had a bench. She returned to it, setting her bag down with more care than it deserved. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. She sat and folded her hands in her lap, the same posture she'd held 1,000 times while waiting for instructions at the boarding house. Wait for the laundry. Wait for the shopping list. Wait for the next task that gave your day structure and purpose. But there were no instructions coming now. "Ma'am?" The voice startled her. She looked up to find the depot master standing nearby, a gray-haired man with spectacles and the awkward expression of someone about to deliver bad news. "Yes?" "We close at 6. You'll need to... Well, you can't stay here after we lock up." "Of course." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I understand." He lingered, shifting his weight. "There's a boarding house on 3rd Street, Mrs. Patterson's place. Clean rooms, decent rates." "Thank you." She didn't tell him she couldn't afford Mrs. Patterson's rates, whatever they were. Pride, stupid, useless pride, kept her mouth shut. The depot master nodded and retreated into his office, clearly relieved to have discharged his duty. Eliza sat until the shadows grew long, until the depot master emerged again, locking the door behind him with an apologetic glance in her direction, until the platform stood empty except for her and the wind that never seemed to stop blowing in this godforsaken territory. Then she stood, picked up her bag, and started walking again. The streets grew quieter as evening approached. Lamps flickered to life in windows. Somewhere, a woman called children inside for supper. The smell of wood smoke and cooking meat drifted through the air, making Eliza's stomach clench with hunger she'd been ignoring since morning. She found herself on the edge of town, where buildings gave way to scrubland and the first slopes of distant hills. A creek ran nearby. She could hear it more than see it, a constant murmur beneath the wind. There were trees here, cottonwoods with leaves that caught the last of the daylight. She set her bag down beside the largest tree and lowered herself to the ground, back against rough bark. Her traveling dress, her good dress, the one she'd saved for this arrival, was already dusty and creased. It didn't matter now. Nothing about appearance mattered when you were sleeping under a tree. The sky deepened from blue to purple. Stars appeared, more than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia, scattered across the darkness like salt thrown by a careless hand. Beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Beautiful and utterly indifferent to whether she lived or died beneath them. She must have dozed, exhaustion finally overcoming fear, because the sound of footsteps jerked her awake. Heavy boots on packed earth. Close. Too close. Eliza scrambled to her feet, heart hammering, one hand gripping the tree trunk for balance. A figure stood 10 feet away, backlit by the last residue of twilight. Tall, broad-shouldered, still. "Didn't mean to startle you." The voice was low, rough-edged, but not unkind. The man took a step closer, and the faint light caught his features. Weathered face, dark hair going silver at the temples, eyes that reflected the emerging starlight. He wore work clothes, a canvas coat over worn cotton, and boots that had seen serious miles. "I have nothing worth stealing," Eliza said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Wasn't planning to steal anything." He gestured toward the creek behind her. "This is my land. Saw you from the cabin up the rise. Thought you might be lost." "I'm not lost. Just sleeping under a tree by choice, then." There was no mockery in his tone, just a dry observation that made her defensive walls crack slightly. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said. The admission cost her, but lying would have cost more. "I'll move on tomorrow, find something." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an attention that felt less like judgment and more like assessment, as if he were reading a problem that needed solving. "You're the woman from the platform," he said finally. "The one Hutchins turned away." Heat flooded her face. Of course. The whole town probably knew by now. Gossip traveled faster than trains in places like this. "Yes." "He's a fool." The words were delivered with such flat certainty that Eliza blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Hutchins. He's a fool. Always has been." The man shifted his weight, hooked thumbs in his belt. "Size doesn't mean a damn thing when it comes to whether someone can work. I've seen men twice your size who couldn't manage a decent day's labor if their lives depended on it." Eliza didn't know what to say to that. Kindness from strangers felt dangerous, like a trap she couldn't see the edges of. "I have a cabin," the man continued. "Empty right now. Creek runs behind it, well out front. There's a bed, a stove. You could stay there, no charge." "I don't—" "Not asking for anything," he interrupted. "Just offering a place that's sitting empty anyway. Better than sleeping under a tree." "Why would you do that?" He considered the question, gaze drifting toward the dark hills. "Because someone did the same for me once. When I first came out here, broke and stupid. Man named Caleb let me sleep in his barn, didn't ask questions, didn't want payment. Said the only thing he wanted was for me to do the same when my turn came." He looked back at her. "This is my turn." Eliza's instinct screamed caution. Strange men offering shelter. Empty cabins far from town. Every warning her mother had ever given her rattled through her mind. But her mother had never been 56 and stranded in Wyoming with $3 to her name. "What's your name?" she asked. "Rowan Hale." "I'm Eliza Whitmore." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Whitmore." "Miss," she corrected quietly. "It's Miss Whitmore." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of shared solitude. "Miss Whitmore, then. Offer stands. Cabin's about a quarter-mile that way." He pointed into the darkness. "I'll be in the main house if you need anything. Won't bother you otherwise." He turned to leave, then paused. "There's supplies in the cabin. Coffee, flour, some canned goods. Use what you need." Then he walked away, boots crunching on gravel, until the darkness swallowed him completely. Eliza stood frozen, mind racing. Every rational thought said this was madness. But hunger and exhaustion and the weight of having absolutely nowhere else to turn made their own argument. She picked up her carpet bag and started walking in the direction he'd pointed. The cabin appeared as a darker shape against the night sky. Small, solid, with a chimney stack and a narrow porch. Eliza climbed the 3 steps and found the door unlocked, as he'd implied it would be. She stepped inside, leaving it open for what little light remained. The interior smelled of wood and dust and something faintly herbal. Sage, maybe. Her eyes adjusted slowly. An iron bedstead against one wall made up with blankets that looked clean. A small table with 2 chairs. A wood stove with a stack of kindling beside it. Shelves holding exactly what he'd described. Coffee, flour, canned beans, a tin of crackers. It was sparse. Austere, even. It was paradise compared to sleeping outside. Eliza set her bag on the table and sank into one of the chairs. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes thinking impossible. Tomorrow she would figure out what this meant, whether she could trust Rowan Hale, what her next step should be. Tonight, she would just breathe. She lit the lamp on the table. There were matches beside it, and the warm glow pushed back the darkness. Then she explored the cabin properly. The bed was narrow, but the mattress seemed intact. The stove was clean, well maintained. There was a basin for washing and a bucket that would need filling from the creek. And on a shelf beside the bed, she found something unexpected. A quilt. Old, hand-stitched, the pattern complex and beautiful, even though the fabric showed its age. Someone had made this with care. Someone had chosen these colors, planned these stitches, created something meant to last. Eliza ran her fingers over the worn cotton, feeling the texture of other hands, other lives. For the first time since stepping off the train, she felt something other than fear. She felt the faint possibility of hope. That night she slept better than she had in weeks. No nightmares of destitution, no panic about the future. Just deep, exhausted sleep in a strange bed that somehow felt safer than anywhere she'd been in a long time. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin window and the sound of birdsong she didn't recognize. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned in a rush, the platform, the rejection, the offer from a stranger. Eliza rose and dressed, using water from the basin to wash her face and hands. Her reflection in the small mirror above the basin showed exactly what she expected. Gray hair coming loose from its pins, lines around her eyes that spoke of too many years and too much worry, a face that would never be called beautiful even by charitable standards. Too small, she murmured to her reflection. Then she turned away from the mirror and got to work. The stove needed cleaning. She found rags in a drawer and scrubbed away soot and ash until the surface gleamed. The floor needed sweeping. There was a broom propped in the corner, so she swept, working dust and debris out the door. The bedding needed airing, so she stripped the sheets and hung them over the porch railing. It felt good to work, familiar, purposeful. She was beating dust from the quilt when she heard footsteps approaching. Rowan Hale appeared around the corner of the cabin, carrying a wooden crate. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." He set the crate on the porch. "Brought some things. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread, milk from this morning." Eliza stared at the supplies, throat tight. "Mr. Hale, I can't—" "It's Rowan, and yes, you can. Consider it payment for cleaning the place. It's been empty 6 months. Needed attention." She wanted to argue. Pride demanded it. But the smell of fresh bread made her stomach clench with hunger she couldn't ignore. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll pay you back when I can." "No need." He glanced at the quilt hanging over the rail. "That was my mother's. She made it before she died. You're welcome to use it." "It's beautiful work." She was particular about her stitching. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the turn toward personal history. "Well, I'll leave you to it. Mr. Hale, Rowan." The correction felt strange on her tongue. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes directly, and she saw something in his face that looked like recognition. Not of her specifically, but of the situation, of being adrift, of needing help when you'd exhausted every other option. "Because kindness costs less than you think," he said, "and means more than you know." Then he walked away, back toward the main house she still hadn't seen. Eliza carried the crate inside and unpacked it slowly, arranging the supplies on the shelves with the same care she'd give precious cargo. Eggs in a bowl, bacon wrapped in cloth, bread that was still faintly warm. She cooked herself breakfast, 2 eggs and a slice of bread, and ate it slowly, savoring every bite. Then she washed the dishes, swept the floor again, and sat at the table to think. She couldn't stay here indefinitely. That much was obvious. Rowan Hale's generosity had bought her time, but time wasn't a solution. She needed work, income, some way to support herself that didn't depend on the charity of strangers. But what work could she do? The boarding house in Philadelphia had used her for everything: cooking, cleaning, mending, managing supplies. She could sew reasonably well. She knew how to stretch a food budget. She could keep a house running with efficiency born of 18 years' practice, none of which seemed particularly valuable in a frontier town that valued physical strength and specific skills she didn't possess. Still, she'd have to try. Eliza tidied the cabin, changed into her other dress, less formal, more practical, and walked toward town. The morning was already warm, the sun bright and relentless in a sky that seemed impossibly large. She passed the main house on her way, a larger structure, well built, but with the same austere quality as the cabin. No decoration, nothing unnecessary. The walk took 30 minutes, long enough for doubt to creep in with every step. What was she going to do? Knock on doors and offer her services? She had no references here, no connections, no proof of her abilities beyond her word. But sitting still felt like giving up, and she hadn't come this far to surrender now. Cheyenne looked different in daylight. Still rough, still raw, but more varied than she'd realized. The main street held not just saloons and supply stores, but a bakery, a seamstress shop, a hotel with actual glass windows. People moved with purpose. Ranch hands heading out of town, women with market baskets, children chasing each other between buildings. Eliza stopped in front of the seamstress shop, gathering her nerve. Then she pushed the door open. A bell chimed. The interior smelled of fabric and thread, walls lined with bolts of cloth and a table scattered with patterns and scissors. A woman looked up from her work, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, with pins stuck in the collar of her dress. "Help you?" "I'm looking for work," Eliza said. "I can sew, mend, do alterations. I worked in a boarding house for 18 years. The woman's eyes traveled over her, assessing. "You new in town?" "I arrived yesterday." "You're the one Hutchins rejected on the platform." There it was again, the story that preceded her everywhere. "Yes." The seamstress considered this, lips pursed. "Can't hire anyone right now. Business is slow, but I'll keep you in mind if that changes." It was a dismissal dressed as politeness. Eliza recognized it immediately. "Thank you," she said, and left. She tried the bakery next, then the general store, the hotel. Each time the answer was some version of the same. "No work available. Maybe later. We'll let you know." By noon, she'd exhausted the obvious options and her feet ached from walking on unfamiliar streets. She bought a piece of bread from a street vendor, spending money she couldn't afford, and sat on a bench to eat it. Across the street, two women stood talking, their voices carrying in the still air. "Is living out there alone with him, can you imagine? It's disgraceful. Someone should talk to the marshal." "What would he do? It's Hale's land. He can do what he wants." "Still, it's not proper. A woman of her age should know better." The words hit like cold water. They were talking about her and Rowan, about the cabin and the arrangement that had saved her from sleeping outside. Eliza stood abruptly, bread forgotten. She walked away quickly, heat burning in her face, the weight of judgment pressing down like a physical force. By the time she reached the cabin, her hands were shaking, not from fear now, but from rage. Rage at Gerald Hutchins for summoning her here and then discarding her. Rage at a town that would rather see her homeless than housed in a way they deemed improper. Rage at herself for caring what strangers thought when survival should be her only concern. She slammed the cabin door behind her and stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. Then, slowly, the rage drained away, leaving only exhaustion. She couldn't control what people said. She couldn't change their judgment or their gossip. All she could control was what she did next. Eliza looked around the cabin, clean now, organized, hers in a temporary way that felt more permanent than anything in her recent past. Then her eyes landed on Rowan's mother's quilt, still draped over the chair where she'd left it. The stitching was intricate, but some sections showed wear, threads pulling loose, seams starting to separate. It needed repair. Careful work by someone who understood how the pattern fit together. She could do that. Eliza retrieved her sewing kit from her carpet bag, one of the few items she'd kept, and settled into the chair with the quilt across her lap. She examined the damage closely, planning her approach. Then she threaded a needle and began to work. The stitches came slowly at first. Her eyes weren't what they used to be, and the light was fading. But muscle memory took over, the rhythm of needle through fabric, the small, careful movements that built something larger. She worked until darkness made it impossible to see clearly. Then she lit the lamp and kept going. There was something meditative about it, something that quieted the chaos in her mind and replaced it with focus, just the quilt, the thread, the simple act of mending what had come undone. She was still working when she heard footsteps on the porch. "Miss Whitmore?" Rowan's voice, careful and questioning. "Come in." He opened the door but didn't enter fully, just stood on the threshold. "Saw your lamp burning late. Wanted to make sure everything was all right." "Everything's fine." She held up the quilt. "I hope you don't mind. It needed mending." He stepped inside then, moving closer to examine her work. His expression shifted, surprise, then something deeper that looked almost like pain. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to. It's beautiful work. Deserves to be maintained." He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the quilt his mother had made. She would have liked you. The words were offered simply, without decoration or false sentiment. Somehow, that made them more valuable. Thank you, Rowan cleared his throat. I heard there was talk in town about you staying here. Of course he had. Bad news traveled even faster than regular gossip. I'll leave if it's causing you problems, Eliza said, setting the quilt aside. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. To hell with their talk. The words came out sharp, harder than anything she'd heard from him before. This is my land. Who I let stay here is my business. Even so, no. He cut her off, but gently. You need a place to stay, and I have one to offer. That's all there is to it. The rest is just noise. Eliza studied him in the lamplight. Tall, weathered, carrying himself with the ease of someone who'd stopped caring what others thought a long time ago. Or maybe someone who'd never cared to begin with. Why did you really offer me the cabin? She asked. The truth, this time. He met her eyes directly. Because I saw Hutchins reject you. Saw you standing there, trying to hold yourself together while everyone watched. And I thought, that could have been me. That was me once. Different circumstances maybe, but the same feeling. Being judged, found wanting, left with nothing. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I don't have much use for people who measure worth by size or age, or any of the other things folks use to make themselves feel superior. Seemed wrong to let you suffer for Hutchins' stupidity when I had the means to help. It was the most he'd said at once, and the honesty in it left her momentarily speechless. I went looking for work today, she said finally. No one's hiring. Didn't expect they would be. Town's suspicious of newcomers. Takes time to build trust. I don't have time. I have $3 left. Rowan was quiet, thinking. Then, can you cook? Yes. Sew, obviously. Clean. Manage a household? All of it. Then you can work for me. I'll pay fair wages. You keep the cabin, handle cooking and mending and whatever else needs doing around the place. I'm not much for domestic work. Place shows it. It was a job offer, a real one, with payment and structure and dignity. It was also complicated in ways that made her hesitate. People already talk, she said carefully. This would make it worse. Let them talk. I need help. You need work. That's business, plain and simple. Is it? The question hung between them. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes acknowledged the complexity she was naming. It's what we make it, he said finally. I'm not asking for anything beyond what I said. You want to take the offer, it's yours. You want to try something else, that's fine too, but at least this way you've got a foundation while you figure things out. Eliza looked down at the quilt in her lap, at the careful stitches holding it together, at the work her hands could do when given the chance. All right, she said. I'll accept, with one condition. What's that? We put it in writing. Terms, wages, expectations, everything clear and agreed upon, so there's no confusion later. A small smile crossed his face, the first she'd seen from him. Deal. We'll draw up papers tomorrow. He moved toward the door, then paused. Welcome to the ranch, Miss Whitmore. After he left, Eliza sat alone in the lamplight, quilt across her lap, and let herself feel the first real relief she'd known since boarding the train in Philadelphia. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what she'd hoped for when she'd answered Gerald Hutchins' letters. But it was hers, built from nothing, earned through survival and stubbornness and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who'd seen her at her lowest and offered help instead of judgment. She picked up her needle and went back to work, mending the torn places, one stitch at a time. Outside, the creek murmured its constant song. The wind rattled the cottonwood leaves. And somewhere in the darkness, Wyoming spread out vast and indifferent, waiting to see what she'd make of herself in its unforgiving territory. Eliza Whitmore, 56 years old and starting over with nothing, bent her head over her work and kept stitching. The story was just beginning. The contract took shape over coffee at Rowan's kitchen table, both of them hunched over paper in the early morning light. Eliza had expected something simple, a handshake agreement dressed up with a few words. Instead, Rowan produced actual contract paper, the kind with official letterhead from a law office in town. You keep this around? She asked, surprised. Had some land disputes few years back, learned to document everything. He dipped the pen in ink. What do you want for wages? She'd thought about this all night, lying awake in the cabin. Asked for too much, and he might reconsider. Asked for too little, and she'd be trapped in poverty despite working. $20 a month, she said finally, plus room and board. Make it 30. Eliza blinked. That's too much. It's fair. You'll be doing work I'd have to hire 2 people for otherwise. Cooking, household management, mending. $30, paid first of every month. He was already writing it down. You get Sundays off unless there's an emergency. Anything beyond cooking and household work, we discuss first. Agreed? Agreed. He wrote steadily, his penmanship better than she'd expected. Clear, precise. Each letter formed with care. When he finished, he slid the paper across to her. Read it. Make sure it says what you think it should. She read slowly, checking every line. The terms were exactly as discussed. No hidden clauses, no vague language that could be twisted later. At the bottom, 2 signature lines. It's fair, she said. Then we both sign. He signed first, then passed her the pen. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote her name, the ink flowing onto paper with a finality that felt like stepping through a door that would close behind her. But it was her choice, her decision. That mattered more than she could articulate. Rowan blotted the signatures, then folded the contract and handed it to her. Keep this somewhere safe. It's your copy. You don't keep it? I know what I agreed to. Don't need paper to remind me, but you might need proof someday if anyone questions the arrangement. The practicality of it struck her. He was thinking ahead, protecting her in ways she hadn't even considered yet. Thank you, she said quietly. He stood, moving to the stove where a pot of coffee sat warming. You want to start today? Might as well. The main house was larger than the cabin, but just as sparse. 2 rooms downstairs, kitchen, and a front room that served as both office and living space, and 2 rooms upstairs she didn't ask about. The furniture was functional, but worn. Dust covered every surface. Dishes were piled in the basin, some crusted with food that had been there long enough to require serious scrubbing. When did you last clean this place? Eliza asked, surveying the damage. Rowan had the grace to look embarrassed. Been a while. A while meaning weeks or months? Months? She rolled up her sleeves. I'll need supplies. Soap, rags, vinegar if you have it. He showed her where things were kept. A pantry that held basic staples and cleaning materials, a pump outside for water, a root cellar that stayed cool even in summer heat. Everything was organized with the same austere efficiency as the cabin. Nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary. Just tools and supplies arranged for maximum utility. You live alone? She asked, hauling water from the pump. Yeah? No family? Not anymore. His tone didn't invite further questions. Eliza let it drop and got to work. She started with the dishes, scrubbing away layers of neglect until the tin plates gleamed. Then the counters, the table, the shelves. Dust came off in gray clouds that made her sneeze. Grime required serious elbow grease. By noon, her back ached and her hands were red from scrubbing, but the kitchen looked transformed. Rowan appeared in the doorway, surveying the change. You don't have to do it all in one day. I want it done right. Can't cook properly in a dirty kitchen. Fair enough. He hesitated, then added, I'm heading into town for supplies. You need anything? The question reminded her of how dependent she'd become. No money of her own yet, no ability to just buy what she needed. Fabric, she said. Plain cotton if they have it. Thread. And better needles. The ones I have are getting dull. Make a list. I'll get whatever's on it. She wrote quickly, keeping requests minimal. Basic sewing supplies. A few food items that would make cooking easier. When she handed him the list, he glanced at it and nodded. Be back before supper. After he left, Eliza explored more carefully. The front room held a desk covered in papers, accounts, correspondence, what looked like property documents. She didn't pry, but couldn't help noticing the organized chaos. Someone who worked hard but had no patience for household order. Upstairs, one room was clearly his. Bed unmade, clothes draped over a chair, the scent of leather and tobacco. The other room was empty except for a trunk in the corner, locked. She left it alone. By the time Rowan returned, she'd cleaned the entire downstairs and started on laundry, hauling his shirts and work clothes to the pump outside. He found her there, scrubbing stains against a washboard. You didn't have to do laundry today. These needed washing. Some of them have been dirty so long the dirt's part of the fabric now. He actually laughed, a short, rough sound like he was out of practice. Can't argue with that. He set down 2 large bundles wrapped in brown paper. Got your supplies. And some other things I figured you might need. Inside the first bundle, fabric, thread, needles as requested. Also scissors, pins, a thimble that looked new. The second bundle held food staples and, surprisingly, a bolt of calico in a soft blue pattern. That wasn't on the list, she said, touching the calico. You've been wearing the same 2 dresses since you got here. Figured you might want to make something new. The kindness of it caught her off guard. Not just the gift, but the noticing. That he'd paid attention to something as mundane as how many dresses she owned. That's very generous, she managed. It's practical. Can't have my housekeeper looking shabby. He said it gruffly, like embarrassed by his own thoughtfulness. Eliza hung the laundry to dry, then went to the cabin to store her new supplies. The calico she spread across the table, running her hands over the fabric. It had been years since she'd sewn something for herself. The boarding house had provided uniforms. Before that, she'd made do with hand-me-downs and second-hand purchases. This was different. This was hers to create however she wanted. She was measuring fabric when she heard voices from the direction of the main house. Men's voices, multiple, growing louder. Eliza moved to the cabin door and looked out. 3 riders had appeared in the yard, ranch hands by the look of them, dusty and weathered. Rowan stood talking with them, his posture tense in a way she hadn't seen before. Can't just let her stay here, one of them was saying. People are talking, Rowan, saying things that aren't good for your reputation. My reputation's my concern. Not when it affects the ranch. We got deals with other outfits, relationships that matter. You shacking up with some woman from back east. Watch your mouth. Rowan's voice dropped to something dangerous. She's working here, that's all. Anyone has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. We are taking it up with you. Carl's saying his wife won't come to the spring roundup dinner if that woman's going to be there. The Hendersons are making noises about buying cattle elsewhere. This isn't just talk, it's business. Eliza's stomach tightened. This was what she'd feared, her presence causing real problems, not just gossip. Then they can buy elsewhere, Rowan said flatly. I'm not running my ranch based on what Carl's wife thinks is proper. You're being stubborn. I'm being fair. There's a difference. The conversation continued, but Eliza had heard enough. She stepped back into the cabin, closing the door quietly. Her hands were shaking again, but this time with anger rather than fear. She was ruining things for him, causing exactly the kind of trouble she'd promised herself she'd avoid. That evening she cooked dinner, venison stew with vegetables from the root cellar, biscuits that came out better than expected. She brought it to the main house and found Rowan at his desk, bent over accounts. Dinner's ready, she said. He looked up, clearly surprised. You didn't have to cook tonight. You've been working all day. That's what you hired me for. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the scrape of spoons against bowls. Finally, Eliza set down her spoon. I heard what those men said this afternoon. Rowan's expression didn't change. Figured you might have. They're right. My being here is causing problems. They're not right. They're scared of change and using you as an excuse. Either way, you're losing business because of me. He pushed his bowl aside. Let me tell you something about business out here. It's built on respect. Not reputation, not what people think is proper, but respect. Whether a man keeps his word, whether he deals fairly, whether he stands by his people when things get difficult. He met her eyes directly. I made you an offer. We signed a contract. Far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the discussion. Anyone who wants to stop doing business with me over that isn't someone I want to deal with anyway. That's a luxury most people can't afford. Maybe, but I've worked 20 years to get to a place where I can afford it. Not going to waste that on people who measure worth by gossip. Eliza studied him across the table. There was something immovable in his expression, a stubbornness that went deeper than pride. Principle, maybe. Or just exhaustion with playing by rules he'd never agreed to. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. Already regretted plenty in my life. This won't make the list. The next 2 weeks settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Eliza worked through the main house room by room, cleaning years of accumulated neglect. She cooked meals that Rowan ate without complaint, but also without much comment. He wasn't a man who wasted words on the obvious. She mended his clothes, finding rips and worn seams that spoke of hard use and little care. In the evening, she worked on the cabin, making it more hers, curtains sewn from leftover fabric, the quilt fully repaired and draped over the bed. Small improvements that cost almost nothing but made the space feel less temporary. Rowan kept his distance, mostly. He worked long days on the ranch, mending fences, checking cattle, handling the 100 tasks that kept the operation running. Sometimes he didn't come back until after dark, eating whatever she'd left warming on the stove. Other times he'd appear mid-afternoon, dusty and tired, and they'd share coffee while he went over accounts at the kitchen table. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who'd learned to exist without constant conversation, who found companionship in shared space rather than shared words. Sunday came, her first day off. Eliza woke without the pressure of tasks waiting and felt briefly unmoored. She was used to work defining her days. Without it, time felt strange. She walked to town thinking she might attend church services. Not from any deep religious conviction, but because it seemed like the thing to do. The place where people gathered, where connections were made. The church sat on a small rise, white-painted and neat. People were already arriving when she got there, families in their Sunday clothes, children running between wagons. Eliza smoothed her dress, the same one she'd worn on the platform that first day, and approached. The conversations died as she drew near, not all at once, but in ripples. People turned to look, then turned away. A woman she didn't know pulled her children closer. A man whispered something to his wife that made her lips purse. Eliza kept walking, chin up, pretending not to notice. She reached the church steps, and a figure moved to block her path. Gerald Hutchins, the man who'd rejected her on the platform. "Miss Whitmore." He said her name like a statement of fact, no greeting in it. "Mr. Hutchins, I don't think you should be here." The words were spoken quietly, but people nearby were listening. Eliza felt their attention like heat on her skin. "It's a public service," she said, keeping her voice level. "It's a gathering for decent people, for families, not for women living in sin with men they're not married to." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Eliza felt blood rush to her face. Around them, people watched with the avid interest of spectators at a hanging. "I work for Mr. Hale," she said clearly. "We have a written contract. There's nothing improper about the arrangement." "A contract." Hutchins smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Is that what you call it? Because that's not what people are saying. They're saying you moved into his cabin the first night you arrived, that you're living there still, cooking his meals, mending his clothes, playing house while pretending it's employment. What people say and what's true aren't always the same thing. Then prove it's not true. Show some decency and leave. Go back east where you belong." Something snapped inside her. All the humiliation of the past weeks, all the fear and uncertainty and rage she'd been swallowing came rushing up. "You have no right to tell me where I belong," she said, voice shaking but firm. "You brought me here with promises you had no intention of keeping. You rejected me because I didn't meet your standards. Fine. But you don't get to control what I do next. You don't get to decide my worth or my place." Hutchins' expression hardened. "You're making a spectacle of yourself." "No, you're making a spectacle. Standing here blocking my way like you have authority over me. You don't. I'm not your mail-order bride. I'm not your problem. I'm just someone trying to survive, same as everyone else in this town." She stepped around him and walked up the church steps. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Behind her, shocked silence gave way to whispers. Inside the church, she took a seat in the back pew. People filed in, but no one sat near her. The entire pew stayed empty, as if she carried some contagion they feared catching. The service passed in a blur. Hymns she didn't know. A sermon she couldn't focus on, prayers that felt hollow against the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. When it ended, she stood and walked out while people were still gathering their things, refusing to give them the satisfaction of watching her leave under their stares. Outside, she found Rowan waiting by his wagon. He was leaning against the side, hat pulled low and straightened when he saw her. "Heard there was trouble. News travels fast." "Always does." He opened the wagon gate. "Come on, I'll drive you back." She climbed up, grateful for the escape. As they pulled away, she saw faces watching from the church. Some curious, some disapproving, all passing judgment on things they knew nothing about. "I shouldn't have come," she said once they were clear of town. "You had every right to be there." "Right doesn't mean welcome." Rowan was quiet for a stretch, guiding the horses along the rutted road. Then, "My mother used to say people fear what they don't understand, and rather than trying to understand, they attack. Makes them feel safer." "Your mother sounds wise." She was. Also stubborn as hell. Would have liked you. It was the second time he'd said that. Eliza wondered what his mother had been like. This woman who made beautiful quilts and raised a son who valued fairness over reputation. "What happened to her?" she asked. "Fever. 10 years ago. Came on fast, took her faster. 1 week she was fine, the next she was gone." His voice stayed level, but his hands tightened on the reins. "My father had already passed by then. Accident with a horse. So it was just me after that." "I'm sorry." "Long time ago now." They rode in silence until the ranch appeared ahead, buildings small against the vast landscape. Rowan pulled the wagon up near the cabin and Eliza climbed down. "Thank you for the ride." "Eliza." He rarely used her first name. It stopped her. "What Hutchins said, what those people think, it doesn't matter. You know the truth, I know the truth. That's enough." "Is it?" "Has to be. Because the alternative is letting them control your life. Deciding for you what's acceptable, what's proper, what you deserve. I've never seen the point in that." He drove off toward the barn, leaving her standing by the cabin with his words echoing in her head. That night she couldn't sleep. The confrontation at the church kept replaying, Hutchins blocking her path, his casual cruelty dressed up as moral concern, the empty pew, the whispers, the weight of being unwanted in a place she had no choice but to try building a life. She lit the lamp and worked on her new dress, the calico Rowan had bought. The fabric felt good under her hands, substantial and real. She cut carefully, using a pattern she remembered from years ago, adjusting measurements for a body that had changed with age. Somewhere past midnight she heard footsteps on the porch. Then a knock. "Eliza, you awake?" She opened the door to find Rowan standing there, fully dressed despite the late hour. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Heard your lamp burning. Wanted to talk to you about something." She stepped back to let him in. He didn't sit, just stood in the center of the small room, hat in his hands. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happened today. About the pressure from town, from the ranch hands, from everyone who seems to have an opinion about our business. Rowan, if you need me to leave, that's not what I'm saying. Opposite, actually." He turned the hat in his hands, clearly working up to something. "I want to build you a house." Eliza stared at him. "What?" "A house, separate from the cabin, separate from the main house. Your own place on the property. We draw up proper papers making it yours, actual ownership, legal and binding. That way no one can say you're living in my house or under my roof. You'll have your own space, your own home. Independent." "Rowan, that's too much." "It's practical. Solves the problem everyone's so concerned about. You work here, you live on the property, but in your own house that no one can question. Building a house costs money, time, resources. I have all of that, and I've been meaning to expand anyway. This just gives it purpose." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why would you do this?" He met her eyes directly. "Because you shouldn't have to defend your right to exist. Because I'm tired of watching people who've never struggled a day in their lives pass judgment on someone just trying to survive. And because..." He stopped, seeming to wrestle with the next words. "Because you remind me that there's still some fairness left in this world. That not everything has to be about taking advantage. I want to protect that, protect you." The honesty in his voice left her speechless. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was something else entirely. Recognition, maybe. Solidarity between two people who'd been pushed to the margins and refused to apologize for it. "I can't ask you to do this," she said quietly. "You're not asking. I'm offering." He settled his hat back on his head. "Think about it. We can talk details in the morning." After he left, Eliza sat at the table with her sewing forgotten. A house. Her own house. The idea was so foreign she could barely grasp it. She'd never owned property, never even imagined owning property. The boarding house had been her employer's. Before that, rooms rented by the month. Always temporary. Always contingent on someone else's approval. But a house with her name on the deed, that was permanence. security, independence in a way she'd never experienced. It was also dangerous, because accepting meant binding herself more tightly to this place, to Rowan, to a future she couldn't fully see. What if things changed? What if his generosity ran out? What if the town's pressure eventually became too much? She looked around the cabin, small, spare, but hers in a way that mattered. Could she dare to want more? The question kept her awake until dawn. Morning brought Rowan to the cabin with coffee and a rolled sheet of paper. He spread it on the table, a rough sketch showing the land, existing buildings, and a new structure marked in pencil near the creek. Here, he said, pointing. Good southern exposure, level ground, close to water. I was thinking 2 rooms, bedroom and main living space, loft for storage, porch facing the hills. Eliza studied the sketch, trying to imagine it real. When would you start? Soon as you say yes. I can do most of the work myself, hire a few men for the heavy lifting. Have it done before winter if we start now. And the ownership papers? Already talked to the lawyer in town. He can draw up a deed transferring that parcel to you outright. No liens, no conditions. Yours. It was too much, too generous, too good to be real. But Rowan's expression held nothing but steady certainty. He meant every word. All right, Eliza said. Yes, let's do it. His face broke into something close to a smile. Good. I'll get materials ordered today. Word spread faster than she'd expected. By the next afternoon, people knew Rowan was building a house. By the following day, speculation ran wild about who it was for and why. Eliza heard the gossip secondhand from a ranch hand who came by for mending. They're saying you've got him wrapped around your finger, the young man said, embarrassed but honest. That you came out here scheming to trap a man with land. And what do you think? She asked. He ducked his head. I think Mr. Hale's the stubbornest man I've ever met. Nobody traps him into anything. If he's building you a house, it's because he wants to. That's good enough for me. She finished his mending and sent him off with biscuits for the bunkhouse. Small kindnesses. Building bridges, one interaction at a time. The foundation went in first, deep holes dug in hard ground, posts set with care. Rowan worked dawn to dusk, measuring twice, cutting once, doing everything with precision that spoke of practiced skill. Other men appeared to help. Ranch hands loyal to him despite the gossip, a carpenter from town who owed Rowan a favor. Eliza watched the structure rise from nothing. Frame walls, roof beams, the skeleton of something that would become shelter. She brought water to the workers, food when they broke for meals. Some of them wouldn't meet her eyes. Others nodded thanks and went back to work. Slowly, grudgingly, they were getting used to her presence. One evening, she found Rowan alone at the construction site, checking measurements by lamplight. You don't have to work after dark, she said. Want to get this done. Why the rush? He straightened, wiping sweat from his face. Because every day this isn't finished is another day people can say things about you, about us. Once you're in your own house with your own deed, they'll have to find something else to gossip about. The protective instinct in his words warmed something in her chest. You care what they think more than you admit. I care what they do to you because of what they think. There's a difference. She stepped closer, looking at the framed walls. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be solid. That's what matters. Rowan. She waited until he looked at her. Thank you for all of this. For seeing me when everyone else looked away. His expression softened. You're easy to see, Eliza. People just choose not to. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither quite knew how to name. Then Rowan cleared his throat and turned back to his measurements, and Eliza walked back to the cabin through gathering darkness, her heart beating harder than the walk warranted. 3 weeks after they'd started, the house stood complete. 2 rooms as promised, with a loft accessed by a ladder. Wood floors, real glass windows, a fireplace built from river stone. The porch faced west, catching evening light. It was simple, practical. The most beautiful thing Eliza had ever owned. The lawyer came out from town with papers. A deed transferring ownership of the land and house to Miss Eliza Whitmore, filed and legal. She signed with shaking hands, her name on an official document that granted her something she'd never thought possible. Property, permanence, a place no one could take away. That night, she moved her belongings from the cabin to the new house. It didn't take long, she didn't own much. But arranging her things in the space felt momentous. Her bed in the bedroom, her sewing supplies on the table, the blue calico dress, now finished, hanging from a peg. Rowan helped carry the heavier items, his presence filling the small rooms. When everything was in place, he stood in the doorway looking around. "It's good," he said simply. "It's perfect." He shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. "Well, I'll let you settle in." "Rowan," she stopped him before he could leave. "This changes things, doesn't it?" "What do you mean?" "Us, this arrangement. I have my own house now. Independence. I could walk away tomorrow, and you couldn't stop me." "That was always true." "No. Before, I was dependent on your charity. Now I have options. Power. That's different." He considered this, then nodded. "You're right. It is different. Better, I think." "Why better?" "Because now whatever happens next is a real choice. Not survival, not necessity, choice." The weight of that settled over both of them. Choice meant risk, meant deciding not just what was practical, but what was wanted. "I'm not going anywhere," Eliza said quietly, "in case you were wondering." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. "Good. Because I'm not ready to lose the best cook I've ever had." He said it lightly, but they both knew he meant more than that. After he left, Eliza stood alone in her house, and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like breaking. She'd survived. Against every odd, every obstacle, every person who'd written her off as too old, too small, too unnecessary. She'd survived and built something real. Outside, Wyoming stretched dark and endless under a sky full of stars. The creek murmured its constant song. And in a house that bore her name on legal documents, Eliza Whitmore finally let herself believe in the possibility of a future. The house changed things in ways Eliza hadn't anticipated, not the big, obvious ways, those she'd expected. The gossip didn't stop, but it shifted tone, became less vicious and more confused. People didn't know what to make of a man who'd build a woman her own house and then live separately from her. It didn't fit their narrative of impropriety. No, the changes that caught her off guard were smaller, more personal. The morning routine shifted first. Before, she'd walk to the main house at dawn to start breakfast, moving through Rowan's space while he was still upstairs. Now she made coffee in her own kitchen, ate bread she'd baked in her own oven, and only went to the main house after she'd fully woken. It gave her mornings back, time that belonged to her alone. Rowan noticed. Of course he did. He was more observant than people gave him credit for. "You're coming later," he said one morning when she arrived to find him already working through correspondence at the kitchen table. "I'm still here in time to make breakfast." Wasn't a complaint, just an observation. She started pulling out pans, measuring flour for biscuits. "Having my own space means I don't have to rush. It's nice." "Good. That's how it should be." The ease between them had deepened since the house was finished. Conversation came more naturally. Silences felt comfortable rather than awkward. They'd settled into something that looked like partnership from the outside, though neither of them had named it as such. 2 weeks after she'd moved into the new house, a rider came up the road just after noon. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw him, a young man on a dusty horse, looking uncertain about whether he was in the right place. "Help you?" she called. He dismounted, pulling off his hat. "Looking for Rowan Hale, ma'am." "Checking the north fence line. Should be back within the hour." The rider shifted his weight, clearly debating something. "Maybe you can help me. I'm looking for work. Heard Mr. Hale might be hiring." "Where'd you hear that?" "Town. Fellow at the general store said Mr. Hale runs one of the bigger operations around here. Treats his people fair." Eliza studied him. Couldn't be more than 20, with the kind of lean frame that spoke of not enough food for too long. Reminded her of herself in a way, desperate and trying not to show it. "What kind of work you done before?" "Ranch hand mostly, some farm work back in Kansas. I can ride, rope, handle cattle. Not afraid of hard labor." "Why'd you leave Kansas?" His jaw tightened. "Drought took our farm. Pa died trying to save it. Ma and my sisters moved in with my aunt, but there wasn't room for me. Needed to find my own way." The honesty in it struck her. No embellishment, no excuses, just facts delivered plainly. "Wait here," she said. "I'll get you some water and something to eat." Mr. Hale should be back soon. She brought him bread and cold beef, a jar of water from the well. He ate like he hadn't seen food in days, trying to maintain dignity while his hunger betrayed him. She remembered that feeling, the shame of need. Rowan rode in an hour later, saw the strange horse, and headed straight for where the young man waited. Eliza watched from the porch of the main house as they talked, watched Rowan's posture, the way he listened more than he spoke. After 10 minutes, he nodded and shook the young man's hand. The rider left looking less defeated than when he'd arrived. "You hired him," Eliza said when Rowan came inside. "How'd you know?" "I know you." He poured himself water from the pitcher, drank deeply. "Kid's got nothing. Reminded me of myself at that age. Figured he deserved a chance." "You keep collecting strays. People are going to talk." "Let them talk. I sleep fine." She smiled despite herself. "What's his name?" "Tom Bridger. Starting tomorrow, working with the cattle crew. I'll pay him fair and see if he's got any skill to back up what he claims." "He will. He's got the right kind of desperation." Rowan looked at her sharply. "That what you had when you got here? The right kind of desperation?" "Yes. The kind that makes you work harder because failure isn't an option. Seems to have served you well." That evening, Eliza returned to her house and found herself restless. The space still felt new enough to be slightly unfamiliar. She'd hung curtains, arranged furniture, made it functional, but it didn't feel fully hers yet. It needed something more. She pulled out the leftover fabric from her dress and started cutting. Potholders, maybe. A table runner. Small things that would add color and life to the stark practicality. As she worked, her mind drifted to Rowan, to the ease they'd found together, to the way he looked at her sometimes, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. She wasn't naive enough to mistake kindness for romantic interest. At 56, she'd long since accepted that certain doors had closed. Romance, marriage, the domestic partnership she'd traveled west hoping to find, those belonged to younger women with prettier faces and stronger backs. But friendship, respect, mutual regard, those were possible. Those were real. The knock on her door came just after sunset. She opened it to find Rowan standing there with something wrapped in oilcloth. "Brought you something," he said. Inside the cloth was a pie. Apple, from the smell, still warm. "Where did this come from?" "Made it." He said it defensively, like expecting her to doubt him. "You made a pie." "My mother taught me, said a man who can't feed himself properly is no kind of man at all. I don't do it often, but I remember how." Eliza unwrapped it carefully. The crust was uneven, crimped by unpracticed hands, but it smelled wonderful. "This is very kind. Figured you're always cooking for me." Seemed fair to return the favor. She cut 2 slices and they sat on her porch, eating pie, as the sky turned from blue to purple to black. The filling was tart, the crust flaky. Not perfect, but made with care. "It's good," she said. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not surprised, just touched." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge. The creek provided its constant background music. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. "Can I ask you something?" Rowan said eventually. "Of course." "Why did you really come west? I know what the practical answer is. Hutchins' letters, the promise of marriage. But what made you willing to leave everything you knew for a stranger?" Eliza set down her empty plate, considering how to answer honestly. "Because I was disappearing. In Philadelphia, in that boarding house, I was just a set of hands that did work. Nobody saw me as a person. 18 years, and I don't think the owner ever knew my favorite color or whether I had family or what I wanted from life. I was just there, doing tasks, taking up minimal space." She paused, finding the right words. Hutchins' letters made it sound like he wanted a partner, someone to build something with. Even if it wasn't romance, it was recognition. The idea that I could matter to someone, contribute to something larger than just keeping someone else's house running. I wanted that. Wanted to be seen. And now? Now I'm seen. Maybe not by the town, not in ways they'd approve of, but by you. You see me as I am, and don't ask me to be smaller or quieter or more convenient. That's worth more than I can properly explain. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "You asked me once why I built you this house, the real reason. You said you wanted to give me independence. That's true. But it's not the whole truth." He turned to look at her directly. The whole truth is I was starting to care about you in ways that complicated the arrangement we had. You living in my cabin, working in my house, it blurred lines that needed to stay clear. I built you this house partly to protect you from gossip, but also to protect both of us from something that couldn't happen the way things were. Eliza's heart kicked hard against her ribs. And now? Now the lines are clearer. You have your own space, your own property. We're equals in a way we weren't before. So now, he trailed off, seeming to struggle with the next part. So now what? She prompted gently. So now if something were to develop between us, it would be a choice. Not circumstance or gratitude or desperation. A real choice made by two people who know exactly what they're choosing. The weight of what he was saying settled over her. This was as close to a declaration as he was likely to get. Careful, measured, leaving room for her to step back if she wanted. I'm 56 years old, she said quietly. I have gray hair and a face that shows every year I've lived. I'm not what men dream about when they think about romance. I'm 51. I have scars from a bull that nearly killed me and a shoulder that aches when it rains. I live alone because most people find me too quiet and too stubborn. I'm not exactly a prize either. That's different. Why? Because you're a woman? That's horseshit, Eliza. We're both just people who've lived hard lives and come out the other side still standing. If that's not worth something, I don't know what is. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to let herself hope that this unexpected thing growing between them could be real and lasting. But fear held her back. Fear of misreading the situation, of losing what they had by reaching for more. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, just wanted you to know where I stand, what I'm feeling, so there's no confusion. He stood, collecting the pie dish. Thank you for the company. After he left, Eliza sat alone on her porch for a long time, turning his words over in her mind. The careful honesty of them. The vulnerability in admitting feelings when most men his age would have died before confessing such things. She thought about the past months, how her life had transformed from that awful moment on the train platform to this. Her own house, her own land, work that mattered, and a man who saw her as someone worth building something with. Was it possible? At her age, with her history, could she dare to want not just survival but happiness? The question kept her awake long into the night. Morning brought a complication she hadn't anticipated. A wagon rolled up the road just after dawn, official-looking, driven by a man in a suit that was too clean for ranch country. Behind him sat another man with the hard eyes of someone used to enforcing rules. Eliza was making breakfast in the main house when she heard voices outside. She looked out to see the men talking with Rowan, his posture gone tense and defensive. She stepped onto the porch in time to hear the suited man saying, "Need to verify the legitimacy of the land transfer. We've received complaints." Complaints from who? Rowan's voice was dangerous quiet. That's confidential, but questions have been raised about whether this transfer was made under duress or in exchange for services of a questionable nature. The implication hung ugly in the air. Eliza felt ice slide down her spine. The transfer was legal and properly filed, Rowan said. You can check with the lawyer who drew up the papers. We intend to, but we also need to interview Miss Whitmore, make sure she understands the terms of ownership and entered into the agreement freely. The second man hadn't spoken yet, but his presence felt threatening in a way that made Eliza's skin crawl. She stepped off the porch and walked toward them. I'm Eliza Whitmore, she said clearly. What exactly do you need to know? The suited man turned to her, expression professionally neutral. I'm Mr. Carson from the Territory Land Office. This is Deputy Marshal Briggs. We need to ask you some questions about your property. Ask? Did Mr. Hale require any payment or services in exchange for the land and house? No. It was a gift given freely with no strings attached. And you're certain you weren't coerced in any way? I'm certain. Mr. Hale built the house and transferred ownership to give me independence and security. That's all. Carson pulled out a notebook, making notes. What is your relationship with Mr. Hale? I'm his housekeeper. We have a written contract specifying my duties and wages. And you live separately? In the house he built for me, on land that legally belongs to me. She kept her voice steady despite rage simmering beneath. Everything is documented and proper. If you have questions about the legality, check the courthouse records. Deputy Briggs finally spoke, his voice rough. People are saying you came here as a mail order bride, and when that fell through, you latched onto Hale instead. That he's being taken advantage of. Rowan moved before Eliza could respond, stepping between her and the deputy. Watch your mouth. Just repeating what people are saying. I don't care what people are saying. You're on my property making accusations about a legal transaction. Unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, you can get back in that wagon and leave. Carson held up a hand. Mr. Hale, we're just doing our job. The complaints were serious enough to warrant investigation. Whose complaints? Hutchins? Because he's had it out for me since I won that contract he wanted 3 years ago. The flicker in Carson's expression confirmed it. Eliza felt everything click into place. This wasn't about propriety or legal concerns. This was Gerald Hutchins using official channels to cause trouble because she dared to survive his rejection. Mr. Hutchins did file a complaint, Carson admitted, but others have raised concerns as well. Name them. I can't do that. Then you can leave. I've answered your questions honestly. The deed is legal. Miss Whitmore is a free woman making her own choices. If that's not enough for you, come back with a warrant or don't come back at all. The two men exchanged glances. Then Carson nodded slowly. We'll be reviewing the documentation. If everything is in order, that should be the end of it. They climbed back into the wagon and drove away, leaving dust and anger in their wake. Eliza turned to Rowan. This is because of me. Hutchins is using me to get at you. Hutchins is a small man who can't stand seeing other people succeed. This isn't about you or me, it's about his own failures. But if they invalidate the deed, they won't. Everything was done legally. They're fishing, hoping to find something improper. When they don't, they'll move on. You don't know that. He met her eyes, and she saw steel beneath the calm. I know that I've dealt with men like Hutchins my whole life. Men who think they can bully their way into getting what they want. It never works in the long run. She wanted to believe him, but the fear that had taken root in her chest wouldn't ease. Everything she'd built here felt suddenly fragile, a house of cards one strong wind could blow down. That afternoon, she found herself at the window of her house, staring at the land that was supposedly hers. Was it real? Could she trust it? Or was this just another temporary illusion that would dissolve the moment someone with power decided to take it away? A knock interrupted her spiral. She opened the door to find Tom Bridger, the young man Rowan had hired. Ma'am, Mr. Hale said you might have some mending needs doing. Sent me over to help if you do. She blinked, surprised. That's kind, but I can handle my own mending. He said you might say that. Also said I should tell you that sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's just being practical. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Rowan was trying to distract her, give her something to focus on besides worry. All right, there's a pile of work shirts that need buttons. Come in. Tom proved surprisingly good with a needle for someone who claimed to be a ranch hand. They worked in companionable silence for a while before he spoke. People in town say a lot of things about you and Mr. Hale. I'm sure they do. For what it's worth, I don't think any of it's true. I've worked for men who use people. Mr. Hale isn't like that, and you seem like someone who knows her own mind. Thank you, Tom. My ma used to say the measure of a person isn't what others say about them. It's how they treat people who can't do anything for them. Mr. Hale hired me when I had nothing. You fed me when you didn't have to. That tells me more than any gossip. The simple wisdom of it steadied something in her chest. Your mother sounds like a smart woman. She was. Died last year. But she taught me to recognize good people when I met them. After Tom left, Eliza sat with his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe the measure of what she and Rowan had built together wasn't in legal documents or town approval, but in the simple daily reality of how they treated each other and those around them. Evening found her back at the main house, cooking dinner as usual. Rowan came in dusty and tired, washing up at the pump before sitting at the table. Tom said he helped with mending, he said. That was thoughtful of you, sending him over. Figured you could use the company, and the kid needs to learn there's more to ranch work than cattle. They ate in silence for a while. Then Eliza set down her fork. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about choices and what's possible between us. Rowan went very still. And? I'm scared of trusting this, of letting myself want something that could be taken away. Today proved how fragile everything is. One complaint, and men show up questioning whether I have the right to own property, to make my own choices. If that's how they treat land ownership, how would they treat... She paused, finding courage. How would they treat anything more between us? With the same suspicion and judgment they already show. Exactly. So why risk it? Because the alternative is letting fear decide your life. He leaned forward. Eliza, people like Hutchins, like those officials who came here today, they want you small. They want you grateful for whatever scraps they're willing to throw. If we let them control what we can and can't do, what we can and can't feel, then they've already won. And if they invalidate the deed, if they find some technicality to take the house away, then we'll fight it. And if we lose, we'll build something else. But I refuse to live my life based on what might happen. I've spent too many years doing that already. She studied his face in the lamplight, saw the conviction there, the stubbornness that had kept him surviving in country that broke weaker people. I don't know if I'm brave enough for this, she admitted. You traveled across the country to start over with nothing. You survived rejection and poverty and a town that wanted you gone. You're plenty brave. He reached across the table, stopped just short of taking her hand. I'm not asking you to decide everything tonight. Just don't let fear make the decision for you. She looked at his hand, rough and scarred from years of hard work. Slowly, she placed her own hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. All right, she said quietly. I won't let fear decide. They sat that way for a long moment, hands joined across the table, the lamplight flickering around them. Outside, Wyoming stretched dark and vast. Inside, something small but real was growing between two people who'd been alone too long. The next morning brought news from town that changed everything. A rider came fast, one of the ranch hands who'd gone for supplies. He found Rowan at the barn, and Eliza heard him from where she was hanging laundry. You need to know what's being said in town. Hutchins is telling anyone who'll listen that he's going to the territorial governor, claims you've violated homestead law, that you're using land fraud to hide an immoral arrangement, says he won't rest until it's investigated properly. Rowan's expression went dark. Let him try. Everything's legal. That's not all. He's got support. Merchants who think you're too independent. Ranch owners who don't like how you do business. They're forming some kind of council saying they'll take it to federal level if they have to. Eliza's stomach dropped. This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was organized opposition with resources and determination. After the rider left, she found Rowan in the barn, radiating controlled fury. This is my fault, she said. If I hadn't come here, don't. The word came out sharp. Hutchins has wanted to bring me down for years. You're just his excuse. If it wasn't this, it would be something else. But they're using me as the weapon. Then we don't give them ammunition. He turned to face her fully. There's one way to settle this that they can't argue with. One solution that's completely legal and removes every objection they could raise. Eliza knew what he was going to say before he said it. We get married, Rowan said quietly. Make it official and legal in every way they claim to care about. Then they'll have nothing to complain about. Her heart hammered. That's a practical solution, not a reason to marry. I know that, but I also know I meant what I said yesterday. I care about you. I want to build a life with you. If that happens sooner than we planned because of pressure from small-minded people, so be it. The question is whether you want it too. Marriage is, she struggled for words. It's permanent. It's binding. It changes everything. Yes, it does. So I need you to tell me true. Is this something you want? Not because of Hutchins, not because of pressure, but because when you think about the future, you see me in it. Eliza closed her eyes, facing the truth she'd been avoiding. When she imagined tomorrow, next week, next year, Rowan was there. Not as an employer or even just a friend, but as something more. Someone whose presence had become necessary to her happiness. Yes, she said, opening her eyes. I see you in it. Then marry me. Not to shut people up, though that's a benefit. Marry me because we're better together than apart. Because we've both been alone long enough. Because what we're building here deserves to be protected. It wasn't a romantic proposal. There was no kneeling, no flowery words, just honest truth delivered plainly. And somehow, that made it perfect. All right, Eliza said. Yes, I'll marry you. His expression broke into something close to joy, rare for him, precious because of it. He stepped forward and pulled her into an embrace that was awkward and wonderful and exactly right. We'll do it soon, he said into her hair. Get the papers filed before Hutchins can cause more trouble. People will say we're proving them right, that this was the plan all along. Let them say it. We'll know the truth. That's what matters. She pulled back enough to see his face. Are you sure about this? Really sure? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The wedding happened 3 days later in the town courthouse, with Tom Bridger and the carpenter who'd helped build the house as witnesses. No ceremony, no celebration, just papers signed and filed, making their union legal in the eyes of the law. The clerk who processed the documents looked at them with barely concealed disapproval, but couldn't refuse to file properly executed paperwork. When it was done, Eliza Whitmore became Eliza Hale, and everything changed while somehow staying exactly the same. They rode back to the ranch in Rowan's wagon, newly married but feeling mostly numb from the speed of it all. We should probably tell people, Eliza said. They'll know soon enough. Courthouse records are public. Hutchins will have a fit. Good. Maybe it'll teach him to mind his own business. But that night, alone in her house, their house now, technically, though they hadn't discussed those logistics, Eliza felt the weight of what they'd done settle over her. Married, at 56, to a man she'd known only a few months. A man who'd saved her from destitution and built her a house and proposed marriage partly to protect her from gossip. Was any of it real? Or was she just fooling herself, mistaking gratitude and circumstance for something deeper? A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened the door to find Rowan standing there, still in his work clothes, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. Can I come in? Of course. He stepped inside but didn't sit, just stood in the center of her small front room. I know today happened fast. No, we probably should have talked more before making it legal, but I need you to understand something. What? I didn't marry you to solve a problem or shut people up. I married you because when I imagine my life going forward, you're in it. Not in the cabin by the creek, not just working in my kitchen, but here, with me, building something that belongs to both of us. Rowan, boy, let me finish. He took a breath. I know you're probably wondering if this is real or just practical, if I actually care or if I'm just being strategic. So I'm telling you now, this is real. You're real. What I feel for you is real, and I'll spend however long it takes proving that to you. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know how to do this. I've never been married, never been in love. I don't know the rules. There are no rules, just two people figuring it out as they go. He moved closer. We don't have to change everything tonight. You can stay in this house, I'll stay in mine. We can take it slow, let things develop naturally, or we can try something different. It's up to you. She looked at this man who'd appeared in her life at its lowest point and offered dignity instead of pity, who'd seen her as worth protecting when everyone else saw her as disposable, who'd built her a house and asked her to build a life. Stay, she said quietly. Tonight. Don't go back to the main house. Stay here with me. Something shifted in his expression, hope mixed with careful restraint. You're sure? I'm sure. We're married now. Might as well start acting like it. They were awkward at first, two people unused to sharing space in intimate ways. But slowly, carefully, they found their way to something tender, to falling asleep in the same bed with hands loosely joined, to waking together as sunlight streamed through windows, to the simple, profound gift of not being alone. And in the morning, when Rowan kissed her forehead before heading out to work, Eliza let herself believe that maybe, against all odds, she'd found exactly what she'd been looking for when she boarded that train west. Not perfection, not ease, but partnership, recognition, the possibility of building something that would last. The morning after their wedding night, Eliza woke to find Rowan already gone, his side of the bed cool, boots missing from beside the door. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. Had he regretted it? Changed his mind in the clear light of day? Then she saw the note on the table, weighted down by a smooth river stone. Gone to check cattle. Coffee's on the stove. Take your time. The handwriting was the same careful script from their contract. She pressed her fingers to the paper, feeling foolish for the relief that washed through her. They were married now. He wasn't going to disappear just because morning came. She dressed and walked to the main house, finding everything as she'd left it. The routine of work helped settle her nerves, kneading bread dough, checking the pantry, planning meals, normal tasks that anchored her to something familiar while everything else shifted beneath her feet. Tom appeared mid-morning with an armload of wood for the stove. "Morning, Mrs. Hale," he said, and she nearly dropped the bowl she was holding. Mrs. Hale. Not Miss Whitmore. The name felt foreign, like clothes that didn't quite fit yet. "Morning, Tom." He stacked the wood with care, then turned to her with the earnest expression of someone working up courage. "I wanted to say, I think what you and Mr. Hale did was brave. Getting married despite what people say shows you don't let fear run your life. Or shows we're tired of fighting battles that shouldn't exist in the first place. Either way," he smiled, "you're good for him. He's different since you came. Less alone, I guess." After he left, Eliza stood at the window watching the hills. Different. Was she different too? She'd spent so many years being invisible, being convenient, being whatever role was required. Now she was a wife, a partner, someone whose presence actually mattered to another person. The weight of it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Rowan returned at noon, dusty and tired. He washed at the pump, then came inside to find her setting out lunch: cold beef, bread, pickled vegetables. "You didn't have to cook," he said. "I wanted to. Besides, it's what you're paying me for." He caught her wrist gently as she moved past. "You're my wife now, not just my housekeeper." "I can be both." "You can. But I need you to know the difference. When you're working, that's one thing. When we're together like this," he gestured at the table, the domestic scene, "this is different. This is us." She sat across from him, heart beating faster than the moment warranted. "I don't know how to be a wife, Rowan. I've spent my whole life being staff, taking orders, fulfilling needs, staying out of the way. I don't know how to be an equal." "Then we'll figure it out together because I don't know how to be a husband either. Never thought I'd have one, to be honest. We're both making this up as we go." The admission helped. They ate in comfortable quiet, passing bread, refilling water. Small acts of domestic partnership that felt both strange and right. That afternoon, a wagon appeared on the road, fancy, pulled by matched horses that spoke of money. Eliza's stomach tightened when she recognized the driver. Gerald Hutchins, dressed in his town clothes, looking like he'd come on official business. Rowan saw him too. His expression went hard as stone. "Stay inside," he said to Eliza. "No. Whatever he has to say, I should hear it." They met Hutchins in the yard together, standing shoulder to shoulder. Hutchins climbed down from his wagon slowly, clearly enjoying the drama of his arrival. "Rowan, Miss Whitmore." He said her old name deliberately, ignoring the marriage. "I thought I should come tell you in person. I've filed a formal complaint with the Territorial Land Office. Fraud, misrepresentation, and violation of homestead statutes." "We're married now," Rowan said flatly. "Filed legal papers 3 days ago. Whatever complaint you had is irrelevant." Hutchins smiled, and it was ugly. "Marriage doesn't erase fraud. If the land transfer was fraudulent when it happened, your marriage doesn't make it legitimate. And I have testimony from multiple witnesses saying she moved into your cabin the very first night she arrived, that she's been living as your mistress for months before any legal marriage took place." "That's a lie," Eliza said, voice shaking with rage. "Is it? You deny living in the cabin by the creek? Cooking his meals, mending his clothes, spending evenings alone with him? Because I have people who'll swear to all of it." Rowan stepped forward, and something in his posture made Hutchins step back. "You're twisting facts to fit your narrative. She had a job. She had her own space. We did everything properly. The land office will determine what's proper. I expect they'll be investigating thoroughly. And when they find evidence of fraud, and they will, that house will revert to your ownership, which means she'll have nothing again, just like she deserves." The venom in his voice struck Eliza like a physical blow. This wasn't about propriety or law. This was personal hatred, pure and simple. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you hate me this much? I never did anything to you except fail to meet your standards on a train platform. You embarrassed me, made me look foolish for bringing you here. Then you latched onto Hale like the parasite you are, and now everyone sees you as some kind of success story.
The poor woman who came west and landed on her feet, it's a lie. You're a manipulator who found a mark, and I'm going to prove it.
Get off my land, Rowan said, voice deadly quiet. Now. Gladly. I've said what I came to say. Expect official correspondence soon, and Eliza. He turned to her with satisfaction in his eyes. You should start packing. You'll be leaving soon enough. He climbed back into his wagon and drove away, leaving poison in his wake. Eliza found she was shaking, not from fear now, but from rage so intense it felt like burning from the inside out. He's going to destroy everything. He's going to try. Rowan, if they decide the land transfer was fraudulent, then we fight it. We have documentation. We have the truth. That has to count for something. But his voice held less certainty than his words. They both knew that truth and documentation didn't always win against determination and money. That evening, Rowan went through his files, pulling out every paper related to the land transfer. The original deed, the contract between him and Eliza, the marriage certificate. He spread them on the table, examining each one for weaknesses. It's all legal, he said for the third time. Everything was done by the book. But Hutchins is right about one thing. I did move into the cabin immediately. We did spend time alone together before the marriage. He can twist that into something improper. Only if people choose to see it that way. They will. They already do. She sat across from him, exhaustion pulling at her. Maybe I should just give up the house. Sign it back to you. That would eliminate the fraud claim. No. The word came out sharp. That house is yours. You're not giving it up because Hutchins is throwing a tantrum. But if it saves you, it won't save anything. He'll just find another angle. This isn't about the house, Eliza. It's about tearing us down because we didn't follow the rules he thinks should govern everyone's lives. She knew he was right, but knowing didn't make the fear any less. That night, lying in bed with Rowan beside her, Eliza stared at the ceiling and let herself imagine the worst. Losing the house. Losing everything she'd built. Maybe even losing Rowan if the pressure became too much. Stop thinking so loud, Rowan murmured in the darkness. How do you know I'm thinking? I can feel it. Your whole body's tense. He rolled toward her, finding her hand in the dark. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this.
I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of losing things, really, but of losing this, us, what we're building. You won't lose me. I married you because I wanted to, not because it was convenient. No investigation or complaint is going to change that. She turned to face him, barely able to see his features in the darkness. How are you so sure? Because I've spent 20 years building this ranch. Fought drought, disease, rustlers, crooked dealers, and my own mistakes. If I can survive all that, I can survive Gerald Hutchins and his wounded pride. The certainty in his voice steadied her. She moved closer, tucking herself against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him. Tell me about when you first came here, she said. You've never really talked about it. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, I was 23. Had nothing but a horse and $50 I'd saved working farms back in Missouri. Heard about Wyoming opening up, land available cheap for people willing to work it. Figured I had nothing to lose. What was it like? Brutal. First winter, I nearly froze to death in a lean-to I'd built that wasn't worth calling shelter. Lived on rabbits and whatever I could shoot. Got so hungry once I seriously considered eating my boots. Despite everything, Eliza smiled. What stopped you? Figured I'd need them for walking if the horse died. Which nearly happened 3 times that first year. How did you survive? Stubbornness, mostly. And Caleb, the man I told you about, who let me sleep in his barn. He taught me everything. How to read the land, handle cattle, make smart deals instead of desperate ones. Took me 5 years to buy my first real parcel, another 10 to build it into something substantial. And you did it alone? Yeah, didn't have a choice. My father died when I was young, my mother later, no siblings. It was just me against the territory. She understood then what she represented to him. Not just a wife, but the end of being alone. Someone to share the burden and the triumph. Someone who saw him not as a wealthy landowner, though she was starting to suspect he was more successful than he'd let on, but as a person. I'm glad you're not alone anymore, she said. Me too. They fell asleep that way,
wrapped around each other like they could physically hold their world together through sheer determination. Morning brought a visitor neither of them expected. A woman in her 40s, well-dressed, arriving in a wagon with a young girl beside her. Eliza was hanging laundry when they pulled up. "I'm looking for Eliza Hale," the woman called. "That's me." The woman climbed down, helping the girl after her. Up close, Eliza could see the quality of her clothes, the careful grooming that spoke of money and status. But her expression was uncertain, almost nervous. "I'm Margaret Henderson. My husband owns the ranch north of here. This is my daughter, Anne." Eliza wiped her hands on her apron, trying to place the name. Henderson, one of the families who'd threatened to stop doing business with Rowan over her presence. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Henderson?" Margaret glanced at her daughter, then back at Eliza. "I came to apologize, and to ask a favor, though I have no right to after how we've treated you." "I don't understand. My husband was one of the people supporting Gerald Hutchins' complaints, saying terrible things about you and Mr. Hale. I went along with it because that's what everyone was doing. It seemed easier than questioning it." She took a breath. "But last night, Anne asked me why it was wrong for a woman to work and own property, and I realized I couldn't give her an answer that made sense. Not a real one." The girl was watching Eliza with open curiosity, no judgment in her young face. "So I'm here to say I'm sorry. For the gossip, for the assumptions, for adding to the pressure you've been under. It was wrong." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "Thank you. That means more than you know. The favor I wanted to ask," Margaret hesitated. "Anne wants to learn to sew properly. I've tried teaching her, but I'm not skilled enough. I heard you do beautiful work. Would you consider taking her as a student? I'd pay you, of course." It was the last thing Eliza had expected. She looked at the girl, maybe 12, with eager eyes and her mother's careful manners. "I'd be happy to teach her," Eliza said. "No payment necessary. I insist. Your time is valuable." They settled on terms. Anne would come twice a week for lessons. As Margaret prepared to leave, she turned back. "There are others like me. Women who went along with the gossip because it was easier than standing against it. But some of us are tired of being easy. We're tired of men like Hutchins deciding what's acceptable. If you need support, testimony, witnesses, anything, you let me know." After they left, Eliza stood in the yard feeling like the ground had shifted again. Not everyone was against them. Not everyone believed Hutchins' version of events. It was a small thing, but small things mattered. That afternoon, official papers arrived. A formal notice of investigation into the land transfer, requiring Rowan and Eliza to appear before the Territorial Land Office with all relevant documentation. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out. Rowan read the notice without expression, then set it aside. "We'll need a lawyer. Can we afford one?" "Yes." He said it simply, and something in his tone made her look at him sharply. "Rowan, how much land do you actually own?" He met her eyes. "About 20,000 acres." Eliza felt the air leave her lungs. 20,000. Give or take. I've been buying parcels for years. Whenever someone went bust or moved on, I'd purchase their claims, consolidated it into one operation. That's enormous. It's a working ranch, requires that much land to be profitable with cattle. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't matter. The land doesn't change who I am, and I didn't want you thinking I was trying to impress you or buy your affection." He paused. "Besides, having money doesn't protect you from small-minded people. Sometimes it makes them worse." She thought about that, about how he'd presented himself as a simple cattleman, living in a sparse house with worn furniture, how he'd never flaunted wealth or used it as leverage. "You've been hiding," she realized. "Not hiding, just not advertising. There's a difference. But if people knew how successful you are, they'd either resent it or want a piece of it. I've seen both too many times. This way, I work in peace and people leave me alone, mostly. Until I came along and complicated everything." He moved to where she stood, taking her hands. "You didn't complicate anything. You made it better. Made me remember why I built all this in the first place, to have something worth sharing with someone who mattered." The words settled into her chest, warm and solid. "We're going to fight this, aren't we? Really fight it. With everything we have." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Rowan hired the best lawyer in the territory, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Thornton who'd built her reputation destroying fraudulent land claims and corrupt officials. She spent 3 days going through every document, interviewing both of them, building a case. "Your marriage helps," she told them. But Hutchins isn't wrong that the timeline looks suspicious. Woman arrives, moves into a cabin on the property, house gets built, land gets transferred, then marriage happens. To an outsider, it reads like a calculated scheme. "It wasn't," Eliza said. "I believe you. But belief isn't evidence. We need to show clear separation between your employment and the land transfer. Show that the house was genuinely a gift, not payment for services." "How do we do that?" Sarah tapped her pencil against her notepad. "Character witnesses. People who can testify to the nature of your relationship, the legitimacy of your work arrangement, Rowan's reputation for integrity. We build a picture of who you both are, not just what the timeline suggests." Margaret Henderson agreed to testify. So did Tom Bridger, the carpenter who'd helped build the house, and several ranch hands who'd witnessed the working relationship between Rowan and Eliza. Even the lawyer who'd drawn up the original deed agreed to speak on their behalf. But Hutchins was building his own case. Eliza heard through Tom that he'd been collecting testimonies from anyone who'd witnessed her arrival, her time in the cabin, her presence at the ranch before the marriage, twisting every innocent fact into evidence of impropriety. The night before the hearing, Eliza couldn't eat. Fear sat in her stomach like lead, making food impossible. She sat on the porch of her house, their house, watching the sun set over hills that had become familiar. Rowan found her there, sitting beside her without speaking for a long time. "What if we lose?" she finally asked. "We won't." "But what if we do? What if they decide the transfer was fraudulent and take the house away?" "Then we'll appeal, fight it at the next level, and the next if we have to." "And if we lose everything?" He turned to look at her directly. "Then we'll still have each other." "That's not nothing, Eliza. That's everything." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love or partnership or whatever they were building together would be enough if the material things fell away. But she'd spent too many years with nothing to easily dismiss the value of property and security. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." The admission surprised her. Rowan always seemed so unshakable, so certain. "You're scared?" "Terrified. Not of losing land or money. I can make that back. But of losing you. Of this investigation driving a wedge between us, making you resent me for dragging you into my fights. That won't happen. You don't know that. People break under pressure. I've seen it happen. Strong people, good people, falling apart when the weight gets too heavy." Eliza took his hand, gripping tight. "I'm not breaking, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Promise?" "I promise." They sat that way until stars filled the sky, holding on to each other and the hope that truth would be enough. The Territorial Land Office occupied a stone building in Cheyenne, imposing and official. Eliza wore her best dress, the blue calico she'd made from Rowan's gift, and tried to hold her head high as they climbed the steps. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than she'd expected, a long table at the front where 3 officials sat, reviewing documents. Rows of chairs for witnesses and observers. And on the left side of the room, Gerald Hutchins with his own lawyer, looking satisfied and certain. Sarah Thornton met them at the door, all business. "Remember what we discussed. Answer honestly, don't volunteer information they don't ask for, and don't let them bait you into anger." The hearing began promptly at 9. The lead official, a gray-haired man named Commissioner Walsh, outlined the complaint. Alleged fraud in the land transfer. Questions about the legitimacy of the arrangement between Rowan Hale and Eliza Whitmore, now Hale. Evidence suggesting impropriety. Hutchins' lawyer went first, presenting his case with theatrical precision. Testimony from townspeople who'd seen Eliza move into the cabin that first night. Ranch hands who'd witnessed her working in Rowan's house. The timeline of events that supposedly proved a scheme to circumvent homestead law. And then, the lawyer said, voice dripping with implication, conveniently, they married, only after questions were raised about the arrangement, only after the impropriety became too obvious to ignore. Eliza felt her face burn but kept quiet. Sarah had warned her this would happen. Then it was their turn. Sarah called witnesses methodically, building a counter-narrative. Margaret Henderson testified about Eliza's character and work ethic. Tom Bridger spoke about Rowan's reputation for fairness and integrity. The carpenter described being hired to build the house, the care and quality that went into it, not something done hastily or fraudulently. Finally, Sarah called Rowan to testify. He stood, walked to the front, and sat in the witness chair with the same calm he brought to everything. But Eliza could see tension in his shoulders, the slight clench of his jaw. "Mr. Hale," Sarah began, "please describe for the commission how you met Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Hale." Rowan described that first night, finding her by the creek, offering the cabin, the simple human decency of helping someone with nowhere else to go. "And the land transfer?" Sarah prompted. "Why did you decide to build her a house and transfer ownership?" "Because she deserved independence. Because I'd built my life on the principle that people should be judged by their character and work, not their circumstances. She'd proven herself capable and trustworthy. Giving her property was a way to ensure she'd never be dependent on anyone's charity again, including mine." "Did you expect anything in return?" "No. The house was a gift, freely given." "And the marriage?" Rowan's eyes found Eliza's across the room. "I fell in love with her, slowly, honestly, despite trying not to. The marriage wasn't strategic, it was inevitable." The room was silent. Even Hutchins' lawyer seemed momentarily at a loss. Then Sarah called Eliza. Walking to the witness chair felt like moving through deep water. Every eye in the room followed her. She sat, hands clasped to stop their shaking. "Mrs. Hale," Sarah said gently, "tell us why you came to Wyoming." Eliza told the truth. All of it. The letters from Hutchins, the hope of partnership, the devastating rejection on the platform, being stranded with nothing, Rowan's unexpected kindness. "Did you enter into any agreement with Mr. Hale with the intention of defrauding the land office?" "No. I accepted a job because I needed work. I accepted the house because he offered me independence. I married him because—" She stopped, finding courage. "Because he saw me as a person worth respecting when everyone else saw me as a problem to be solved or an embarrassment to be hidden." "And the house? If the commission rules the transfer fraudulent, what will you do?" Eliza met Commissioner Walsh's eyes directly. "I'll fight that ruling, because the house is mine. Not through fraud or manipulation, but through honest work and a generous gift from a good man. I've spent my whole life being told I was too small, too old, too unnecessary. I'm done accepting other people's judgment about what I deserve." Sarah sat down. Hutchins' lawyer stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Hale, isn't it true that you moved into Mr. Hale's cabin the very night you arrived?" "Yes." "And that you spent months living on his property, working in his home, before any legal marriage?" "Yes." "Convenient that you're now married. Convenient that you only formalized the relationship after questions were raised." "It wasn't convenience. It was certainty. Rowan proposed because we'd both realized what we meant to each other. The timing was accelerated by pressure from people like your client, but the feeling was real. Easy to claim feelings are real when property is at stake. The property was already mine before the marriage, legally transferred and filed. The marriage didn't change ownership, it changed our relationship." The lawyer tried several more angles, but Eliza held firm. Beside her, she could feel Sarah's approval. Finally, after 3 hours of testimony and cross-examination, Commissioner Walsh called a recess. The commission would deliberate and deliver their ruling by end of day. Rowan and Eliza waited in a small room down the hall, hands clasped, saying little. Sarah joined them, looking cautiously optimistic. "You both did well. Came across as honest and credible, but these things can go either way." The wait felt endless. Eliza watched sunlight move across the floor, marking time in slow increments. Her whole future balanced on the decision of 3 people who'd never met her before today. At 4 o'clock, they were called back. Commissioner Walsh looked at them over his spectacles, expression unreadable. Then he spoke. "After careful review of all testimony and documentation, this commission finds no evidence of fraud in the land transfer from Rowan Hale to Eliza Whitmore Hale. The transfer was executed legally, with proper documentation and clear intent. The subsequent marriage, while raising questions about timing, does not invalidate the transfer as it occurred prior to the marriage." Eliza felt the world tilt. They'd won. They'd actually won. "However," Walsh continued, and her heart dropped,
We remind all parties that homestead law exists to prevent abuse and ensure fair distribution of territorial land. While no fraud occurred in this case, the Commission encourages clearer documentation and third-party oversight in future similar transfers to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. It was a victory with a warning attached, but it was still a victory. Across the room, Hutchins stood abruptly and left, his lawyer gathering papers with jerky, frustrated movements. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Congratulations. Your house is legally and unquestionably yours. Outside in the fading afternoon light, Rowan pulled Eliza into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. We won, he said into her hair. You won. We both did. On the ride back to the ranch, exhaustion and relief mixed until Eliza felt drunk on it. They'd survived. The house was hers. No one could take it away. But more than that, they'd proven something. Not just to the Commission or the town, but to themselves. That what they'd built together was real, that it could withstand pressure and scrutiny and suspicion. That night, lying in their bed in their house on their land, Eliza finally let herself believe in the possibility of a future without fear. Thank you, she said into the darkness. For what? For seeing me. For building me a house. For fighting for us when it would have been easier to walk away. Rowan's arms tightened around her. I didn't build you a house, Eliza. I built us a foundation. You did the rest, turned it into a home, into something worth protecting. She fell asleep that night with his heartbeat steady against her ear and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. Victory should have brought peace, but Eliza learned quickly that winning a battle didn't end a war. The Commission's ruling settled the legal question, but it didn't change minds. The town still whispered. People still stared when she walked down the street. Gerald Hutchins still lived 3 miles away, nursing his wounded pride like a poison he'd eventually have to spit out. The difference now was that Eliza stopped caring what they thought. She woke the morning after the hearing to find frost on the windows. First real cold of the season, warning that winter was coming whether they were ready or not. Rowan was already up, stoking the fire in the bedroom stove, moving quietly to let her sleep. What time is it? She asked. Early. Go back to sleep. But she was awake now, watching him work. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years doing everything alone, not wasting motion. She wondered how long it would take before he learned to let her help with small things, before he trusted that she wasn't going anywhere. I've been thinking, she said. That's dangerous. She smiled despite herself. About the house. It's mine now, legally, unquestionably, but it's also ours, our home. And I want to do something with it. He turned from the stove. Like what? Make it beautiful, not just functional, actually beautiful. She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. I want curtains that match, furniture that fits the space properly, maybe even paint on the walls. I want it to feel like something we built together, not just something I was given. You want to spend money on decoration? I want to spend our money on making a home. There's a difference. Rowan studied her, and she could see him working through it. The practical rancher who'd lived Spartanly for decades versus the man who'd built her a house because she deserved beauty and independence. Finally, he nodded. All right, what do you need? They made a list over breakfast. Fabric for curtains and cushions, paint, soft colors that would catch light and make the small rooms feel larger. A better table for the kitchen. Shelving for books neither of them owned yet but could imagine collecting. Small things that added up to transformation. This is going to cost more than you think, Rowan warned. Then I'll earn it. I've been thinking about that too. About what? About Ann Henderson. Margaret's paying me to teach her sewing. What if I taught others? Not just sewing, but practical skills, mending, basic tailoring, maybe even quilting. There are ranch wives out here who never learned proper needlework, and their families suffer for it. I could teach them, charge fair rates, build something of my own. She watched his face carefully, looking for resistance, for the assumption that her work was supplemental to his, that her earnings would be pocket money rather than real income. Instead, he smiled, a real one, reaching his eyes. You'd be good at that. You're patient, and you know your craft. When do you start? You think it's a good idea? I think you've been looking for a way to be more than someone's housekeeper since the day you arrived. This could be it. The support in his voice made her chest tight. It might fail. Might succeed.
Won't know until you try. That afternoon, Eliza drafted a simple notice: sewing and mending lessons, reasonable rates, all skill levels welcome, and asked Tom to post it at the general store next time he went to town. She expected maybe 1 or 2 inquiries if she was lucky. Within a week, she had 6 students signed up. Women from ranches around the territory, some young wives struggling with basic repairs, others older women who wanted to improve their skills. Ann Henderson brought 2 friends from town. Even one of the ranch hands asked if she'd teach him to sew buttons. His mother had died young, and he'd never learned. The lessons happened in her house, students crowding around the kitchen table with fabric and thread. Eliza taught them the way she'd been taught, patiently, demonstrating multiple times, correcting mistakes without judgment. It felt good, purposeful in a way that cooking meals and cleaning houses never had. But more than that, it changed how people saw her. She wasn't just the woman who'd latched onto Rowan Hale anymore. She was Miss Eliza, who could fix anything with a needle and thread, who charged fair prices and didn't gossip about her students, who made them feel capable rather than inadequate. Slowly, grudgingly, the town's opinion began to shift. Margaret Henderson became a regular visitor, bringing fabric scraps and news from town. One afternoon she arrived looking troubled, accepting tea but not drinking it. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "About Gerald Hutchins." Eliza set down her own cup. "What about him?" "He's leaving, selling his ranch and moving back east. Says Wyoming doesn't suit him anymore." The news should have brought relief. Instead, Eliza felt nothing but tired sadness. "When?" "End of the month. He's already found a buyer, some outfit from Denver. They're taking the land and the cattle, everything." "Good riddance," Rowan said from the doorway. Neither woman had heard him come in. "Maybe," Margaret said carefully, "but I thought you should know, before he leaves, he's been talking, telling anyone who'll listen that he was right about you both all along, that you manipulated the commission, that the ruling was political rather than legal. He's trying to poison the well one last time." "Let him talk," Eliza said. "We know the truth. Anyone who matters knows the truth." "That's what I told my husband. But Walter said you should be prepared. Hutchins is bitter enough to do real damage if he can." After Margaret left, Rowan stood at the window, watching the hills. "I should talk to him. Clear the air before he leaves." "What good would that do?" "Maybe none. But I'm tired of letting him define how people see us. Tired of his version of events being the only one people hear." "Rowan, I'm not going to fight him. Just talk. Man to man. See if we can end this without more poison." Eliza wanted to argue, but she recognized the set of his shoulders. He'd already decided. He rode to Hutchins' ranch the next morning, alone despite Eliza's offer to come with him. She spent the day anxious, working through her nervousness by cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, rearranging furniture that was already perfectly placed. When Rowan returned just before sunset, she met him at the door. "How did it go?" He dismounted slowly, like the conversation had aged him. "About how you'd expect. He's convinced himself we're villains in his story. Nothing I said made a difference." "What did you say?" "That I was sorry things turned out the way they did. That I never meant to hurt his pride or his reputation. That I hoped he'd find peace wherever he ended up next." Rowan loosened his horse's girth, began removing the saddle. "He told me to go to hell. So that's it? He leaves hating us?" "He leaves hating himself, I think. Hating that he made a mistake bringing you here and then compounded it by being cruel. Easier to blame us than face that." Eliza helped him carry the saddle to the tack room. "Do you think he'll ever realize that?" "Probably not. Some people would rather be right than happy. He's one of them." They stood together in the barn as twilight deepened outside, the smell of hay and leather familiar and comforting. "I feel sorry for him," Eliza said quietly. "Why?" "Because he's going to spend the rest of his life wondering what would have happened if he'd made different choices, if he'd been kinder on that platform, if he'd accepted that people don't fit into neat categories. He'll never know what he could have had. And we will. Yes, we will." Hutchins left 3 weeks later, wagon loaded with possessions, heading east toward a life Eliza couldn't imagine and didn't want. She didn't watch him go, but she heard about it from students who'd seen him leave. No fanfare, no goodbye gatherings. Just a man retreating from a place that had never quite felt like home, With him gone, something in the town relaxed. The gossip didn't stop entirely, it never would, but it lost its vicious edge. People started nodding to Eliza when she passed on the street. The general store owner made conversation about the weather. Small gestures, but they accumulated into something that felt almost like acceptance. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled against the house walls. Wind howled through gaps in the siding that Rowan spent long days sealing. The ranch work slowed but never stopped. Cattle still needed feeding. Fences still needed checking. Equipment still needed maintaining. Eliza's sewing students dropped to just 2 through the worst months. Ann Henderson, determined to finish the quilt she'd started, and the ranch hand who was working through progressively more complicated repairs. But even 2 students meant purpose, meant income, meant building something that belonged to her alone. She used her earnings to buy fabric for new curtains, deep blue that reminded her of twilight. Rowan helped her hang them, standing on a chair while she directed placement. When they were finished, the house looked transformed. No longer just functional shelter, but a home with personality and care evident in every corner. "It's beautiful," Rowan said, and she could hear the surprise in his voice, like he'd forgotten places could be beautiful and not just practical. "We're not done yet." She showed him her sketches, ideas for the main house, ways to bring warmth and life into the austere rooms he'd lived in for years. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful touches that would make the space feel lived in rather than survived in. "You don't have to do all this," he said. "I know, but I want to. This ranch is our life now. I want it to reflect who we are, not just what we can endure." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been this wise. You're just finally listening." Through the long winter evenings, they worked together on projects that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with building a life. Eliza taught Rowan basic embroidery. He was terrible at it but tried anyway, mangling a pillowcase before finally giving up. He taught her to read accounts, showing her how the ranch finances worked, making her a true partner in understanding what they owned and owed. One night, snow falling heavy outside, they sat by the fire while Eliza worked on restoring his mother's quilt, the one that had been on the cabin bed when she'd first arrived. Time and use had taken their toll, but the pattern was still beautiful, the craftsmanship still evident. "Tell me about her," Eliza said. "Your mother. Really tell me, not just the brief mentions." Rowan was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "She was small, smaller than you, but fierce, had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. Where did she come from?" "Pennsylvania originally. Met my father when he was working railroad construction back east. He convinced her to come west with him, told her about the opportunities, the land, the chance to build something from nothing. She thought he was crazy but came anyway." "Was she happy here?" "I think so. It was hard, harder than anything she'd expected, but she never complained, just worked and built and made the best of what we had." He paused. "She would have liked you, the way you don't quit, the way you see potential in things other people would throw away." Eliza looked down at the quilt in her lap. "Like this? Like this? Like me?" She set the quilt aside and moved to sit beside him, tucking herself under his arm. "You're not something that needed fixing, Rowan. Maybe not fixing, but you made me better. Made me want to be better." They sat that way until the fire burned low, comfortable in silence that felt like its own kind of conversation. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, the snow melting in patches to reveal dead grass and mud. But underneath, new growth was already starting, tiny green shoots pushing through frozen ground with stubborn determination. Eliza's students returned as the weather improved, and she found herself teaching 8 women regularly. She raised her rates slightly. Sarah Thornton had pointed out she was undercharging for her skill level and was surprised when no one balked. If anything, the higher price seemed to make people take the lessons more seriously. With the extra income, she bought supplies to start a small garden beside the house. Nothing ambitious, just vegetables and herbs, things that would grow in Wyoming's difficult soil if tended carefully. Rowan helped her prepare the ground, breaking up earth that had never been cultivated. "You know this might not work," he said, driving the spade deep. "It'll work, just needs patience and stubbornness. You'd know about both of those." She threw a clod of dirt at him. He dodged, grinning,
and for a moment they were just two people playing in mud rather than a couple in their 50s trying to coax life from reluctant ground.
The garden became her project through spring and into summer. She weeded religiously, watered during dry spells, fought off rabbits and insects with methods learned from Margaret Henderson and other ranch wives. Some plants failed despite her best efforts, but others thrived. Carrots that pushed deep into loosened soil, beans that climbed stakes Rowan built, tomatoes that ripened slowly under the relentless sun. The first time she brought in a basket of vegetables she'd grown herself, Rowan looked at it like she'd performed magic. "From our land," she said. "From dirt we broke and seeds we planted." "You planted. I just dug holes." "We did it together." That distinction mattered to her more than she could fully explain. Not her garden or his ranch, but theirs, built together through combined effort and shared purpose. By midsummer, the house had been fully transformed. New curtains in every window, furniture Rowan had built or bought based on Eliza's specifications. Rugs she'd woven from fabric scraps during slow evenings. Shelves holding books they'd begun collecting. Agricultural guides. Novels Tom Bridger had recommended. Even a book of poetry Eliza had found in town and bought on impulse. The main house got similar treatment. Eliza worked through it room by room, adding comfort without changing its fundamental character. Rowan remained involved in every decision, learning that having opinions about domestic space wasn't unmanly, just human. One evening, standing in the main house kitchen, now warm with copper pots and herb bundles and the smell of bread baking, Rowan pulled her close. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For making this feel like a home. I lived here 20 years and it never felt like this, like somewhere I wanted to be rather than just somewhere I slept between work. You made the home possible. I just decorated it. You did more than that. You made it matter." Anne Henderson finished her quilt in late summer, a wedding ring pattern in blues and greens that showed real skill for a 13-year-old. Eliza helped her bind the edges, showing her the final steps that would make it last for years. "I want to be like you when I grow up," Anne said, focused on her stitching. "Why's that?"
"Because you're not afraid. My mother says you came here with nothing and built a whole life, that you didn't let people's opinions stop you from doing what you needed to do." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "I was terrified every step of the way. But you did it anyway. That's what bravery is, isn't it? Doing things even when you're scared?" Out of the mouths of children, Eliza thought. "Yes, I suppose it is."
After Anne left with her finished quilt, Eliza sat at her kitchen table feeling the weight of that conversation. She'd never thought of herself as brave, just desperate, stubborn, unwilling to quit even when quitting would have been easier. But maybe that was what bravery looked like in real life. Not fearlessness, but choosing to move forward despite fear. Not certainty, but faith that the next step was worth taking even when you couldn't see where it led. Fall arrived with sudden cold frost warnings that sent everyone scrambling to harvest the last vegetables and prepare for winter. Eliza's garden yielded enough to can vegetables for winter and share with neighbors. Margaret Henderson, Tom Bridger, even the ranch hands who'd been skeptical of her when she first arrived. The act of giving away food she'd grown felt powerful in ways she hadn't anticipated. This was abundance. Enough to share, enough to build community, enough to prove she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. One afternoon in October, a stranger rode up to the house, a woman in her 40s, well-dressed but travel-worn. She dismounted and approached where Eliza was working in the garden. "I'm looking for Eliza Hale," she said. "I heard she teaches sewing." "That's me. Are you interested in lessons?" "Not exactly. I'm Catherine Morris. I run a women's cooperative in Laramie. We sell handwork, teach skills, help women build independent income. I've heard about what you're doing here, teaching women practical skills, building community. I wondered if you'd be interested in partnering with us." Eliza stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Partnering how?" "We could sell your students' work through our cooperative, give them access to markets they couldn't reach on their own. And you could teach workshops in Laramie, intensive courses for women who can't travel here regularly. We'd pay you and help promote your services." It was an opportunity Eliza had never imagined. Teaching had started as a way to earn extra income and fill her time. Now it was becoming something larger, a business, a reputation, a contribution that reached beyond this one ranch. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Here's my card. We're always looking for skilled teachers who understand what it's like to build a life from nothing. That evening, Eliza showed Rowan the card, explained the offer. He listened carefully, asking practical questions about time commitment and financial arrangements. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. "I want to say yes, but it would mean traveling to Laramie sometimes, being away from the ranch for days at a time." So? "So I'm your wife, your partner. I don't want to just decide things that affect both of us." He smiled. "Eliza, you're also your own person with your own work. If this is what you want, do it. I'll manage fine for a few days. Besides," he pulled her close, "I like that you're building something bigger than just us. Makes me proud." She wrote to Catherine Morris that night, accepting the partnership. Within a month, she'd taught her first workshop in Laramie. 15 women crammed into a rented hall, learning advanced quilting techniques. She came home exhausted and exhilarated, full of stories about the women she'd met and the work they were doing. Rowan listened to it all, asking questions, celebrating her success as genuinely as if it were his own. Winter arrived for the second time since Eliza had stepped off that train. But this winter felt different. The house was warm and beautiful. The pantry was stocked with vegetables she'd grown and meat Rowan had prepared. Her sewing business provided steady income and purpose, and every evening she had a partner to share it all with. One night, snow falling heavy outside, they sat by the fire talking about nothing important. Tom Bridger's latest mishap with a stubborn horse, Margaret Henderson's upcoming trip to visit family back east, whether they should expand the garden next spring or focus on other improvements. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been at that platform?" Rowan asked suddenly. Eliza considered it. "Sometimes. I'd probably have ended up working in some boarding house in town, scraping by, invisible, exactly like I was in Philadelphia. Or maybe you'd have found another way, built something different. Maybe, but I wouldn't have found you. Is that important, finding me?" She turned to look at him directly. "It's everything, not because I needed rescuing, though I did, but because you saw me when I'd stopped seeing myself. You reminded me that I was more than just hands that did work, that I deserved space and property, and a life that was mine to choose. You did that yourself. We did it together. That's the point. I couldn't have built this alone, and you—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "You needed someone to build it with, to make all that land and success mean something beyond just accumulation." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I spent 20 years focused on survival, building the ranch, acquiring land, proving I could make it in country that breaks most people. But it was hollow. All that success and no one to share it with, no reason for it beyond just having it. And now? Now it matters. The house matters because you made it beautiful. The ranch matters because we're building something together. Even the hard days matter because I'm not facing them alone anymore." Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you. I don't think I've said that directly yet, but I do. Not because you built me a house or gave me security, but because you're kind and stubborn and honest, because you make me want to be braver than I naturally am. I love you too. Have for a while now. Just took me time to recognize it." They sat that way until the fire burned low, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something lasting anyway. Spring came again, as it always did. The garden got planted earlier this time, Eliza confident now about what would grow and what wouldn't. Her teaching schedule expanded, monthly workshops in Laramie plus her regular students at home. The cooperative began selling quilts and embroidered items made by her students, creating income streams for women who'd never had independent money before. One afternoon, Margaret Henderson arrived with news that made Eliza sit down hard. "They want to name you Woman of the Year at the Territorial Fair for your work teaching and building the women's cooperative. There's a ceremony and everything." Eliza stared at her. "That's ridiculous." "It's not. You've helped dozens of women build skills and income. You've proven that a woman can own property and run a business and be respected for it. That matters, Eliza. It matters to all of us." The ceremony happened in late summer at the fair in Cheyenne. Eliza wore her best dress, not the blue calico anymore, but a new one she'd made specifically for the occasion, deep green with careful stitching that showed her skill. Rowan stood beside her, uncomfortable in town clothes, but proud enough to bear it. When they called her name, Eliza walked to the platform on shaking legs, accepted a certificate and a small purse of prize money, looked out at the crowd and saw faces she recognized, students, neighbors, even some people who'd been hostile when she first arrived. They were clapping. For her. For what she'd built. She kept her speech short. Thanked the people who'd supported her, acknowledged that she'd arrived with nothing and been given the chance to build something. Encouraged other women to take risks, to believe they were worth more than the limitations society placed on them. When she finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. She returned to her seat beside Rowan, hands shaking with adrenaline. "You did good," he murmured. "I'm terrified." "You should be. You just told a crowd full of women that they can do anything. Now they're going to believe you." She looked at him sharply, but he was smiling, proud and amused and absolutely certain. The ride home that evening was quiet, both of them exhausted from the day. But as they crested the hill that revealed the ranch spread below, the main house, her house, the barn and outbuildings, the garden plot already showing green, Eliza felt something settle in her chest. This was home. Not just a place she lived, but a place she belonged. Land she owned, a business she'd built, a partnership she'd chosen freely. A year ago, she'd been standing on a train platform with nothing. Now she had everything that mattered. "What are you thinking?" Rowan asked. "That I'm glad Gerald Hutchins rejected me." He laughed, surprised. "Why?" "'Cause if he hadn't, I'd be stuck on some miserable ranch with a man who valued me for what I could do rather than who I was. I'd be surviving but not living, tolerated but not loved. Instead I'm here, with you, building something that's actually ours. It's better than anything I imagined when I bought that train ticket west." They rode in silence until the house came close enough to see details. The curtains in the windows, the garden fence, the porch where they'd spent so many evenings talking through the day. "I want to build something else," Eliza said suddenly. "What?" "Another house. Not for us. We have ours. But for women who show up the way I did, stranded, desperate, with nowhere to go. I want to give them the same chance you gave me, a place to stay, time to figure things out, maybe even work if they want it. What do you think?" Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, "I think it's the best idea you've had yet. When do we start?" They broke ground on the new building in early fall. Nothing fancy, just a solid structure with 4 small rooms, a shared kitchen, basic furniture. A place where women could land softly instead of crashing, where they could find their feet before deciding their next steps. Word spread quickly. By the time the building was finished in late winter, 3 women had already inquired about staying. One had been widowed and lost her farm to debt. Another had escaped a violent marriage. The third had simply arrived in Wyoming hoping for work and found none. Eliza welcomed them all, showed them their rooms, explained the house rules, offered work if they wanted it, helping with cooking, mending, garden work. Some stayed weeks. Others stayed months. One decided she liked ranch life and hired on with a neighboring outfit. Another learned enough sewing to start her own business in town. They came and went, these women who needed refuge, and each one left stronger than she'd arrived, carrying the knowledge that she was worth more than her worst moment. 2 years after Eliza had stepped off that train, rejected and terrified, she stood on the porch of the main house watching the sun set over land she co-owned with a man who loved her. The refuge house showed lamplight in its windows, currently sheltering 2 women finding their way forward. Her own house sat beautiful in the fading light, curtains she'd sewn, glowing warm. The garden lay dormant for winter but would return with spring. Rowan came up behind her, wrapping arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "About how none of this was the plan. How I came here for one thing and found something completely different. Better or worse?" "Infinitely better. Scary and hard and uncertain sometimes. But better. Any regrets?" She thought about that honestly. The fear of those early days, the humiliation on the platform, the months of gossip and judgment, the constant worry that everything would be taken away. "No," she said finally, "no regrets. All of it, even the bad parts, led here. To this. To us." They stood together as darkness fell and stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed her lowest moment now seeing her at her strongest. Eliza thought about the woman who'd arrived here with a carpet bag and nothing else. how small she'd felt, how certain she was finished. That woman would barely recognize who Eliza had become, would be amazed at the house, the business, the marriage, the life built from absolute nothing. But more than that, she'd be amazed at the strength, the courage to keep going when everything said to quit, the stubbornness to demand respect when it wasn't freely given, the wisdom to recognize real partnership when it appeared disguised as charity. "Thank you," Eliza said quietly. "For what?" "For building me a house when what I really needed was a foundation, for seeing me when I was invisible, for teaching me that I was worth fighting for." Rowan turned her to face him. "You taught yourself that. I just provided the space for you to learn it. We taught each other." "Yeah, I guess we did." Winter gave way to spring again, the cycle continuing as it always would. The garden got planted, bigger this time, with help from the women staying at the refuge house. Eliza's teaching business expanded to include correspondence courses for women who couldn't travel for lessons. The cooperative grew, providing income and purpose to dozens of women across the territory. But the most important growth was quieter. The way Eliza no longer flinched when someone called her Mrs. Hale. The way she spoke in town meetings about women's business concerns, no longer intimidated by men who thought their opinions mattered more. The way she'd learned to accept her own success without dismissing it as luck or timing. She'd become someone who built things, not just businesses or buildings, but opportunities. Pathways for other women to find their own strength. Proof that age and circumstance didn't define what was possible. One evening, sitting on the porch with Rowan after a long day, she said, "I want to write a letter." "To who?" "To myself. To the woman standing on that platform 2 years ago, terrified and certain everything was over. I want to tell her what's coming, that she'll survive it, that she'll be happy." "Would she believe you?" Eliza thought about that. Probably not. She couldn't imagine any of this. The idea that rejection could lead to something better would seem impossible. So why write it? Because maybe someday someone else will need to hear it. Some other woman standing at her worst moment, certain she's failed. Maybe knowing how this story turned out will give her courage to take the next step. Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Then write it. Tell the truth, all of it. The fear and the hope and the work it took. Tell them it's possible." She did write it late that night by lamplight. Wrote about the platform and the cabin and the slow building of trust. Wrote about fear and courage and the difference between them. Wrote about partnership and independence and how they weren't opposites but complements. Wrote about building a life when you thought your life was over. When she finished, she folded the pages and put them in the box where she kept important documents. Someday, maybe, they'd matter to someone. Or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, she'd told the truth about what was possible when you refused to quit. Years passed. The ranch prospered. The refuge house sheltered women who needed it, sent them back into the world stronger. Eliza's teaching became legendary in the territory. Women traveled from hundreds of miles away to study with her. The cooperative grew into a significant economic force, providing income and independence to women who'd never imagined either. But the heart of everything remained the same. The house she and Rowan had built together. The partnership they'd forged from unlikely circumstances. The quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over land they'd made beautiful through care and work. Eliza was 63 when Tom Bridger married, bringing his young wife to live in a cabin Rowan built for them near the main house. The girl was nervous, overwhelmed by ranch life she'd never experienced. Eliza took her under wing, teaching her the same skills she taught everyone else. Not just sewing, but how to survive in country that demanded strength you didn't know you had. "How did you do it?" the girl asked one afternoon. "Come here alone and build all this?" Eliza looked around her kitchen. Beautiful now, full of light and warmth and the evidence of a life well lived. "I didn't build it alone. I had help. And I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That accepting kindness doesn't make you less independent. That building something with someone is stronger than building it alone." "But you own your own house, have your own business. You're not dependent on anyone." "I'm not financially dependent, no, but I'm dependent in other ways. On Rowan's partnership, on students who trust me to teach them, on other women who build things alongside me. Independence isn't the same as isolation. I learned that the hard way." The girl nodded slowly, processing. "I want to be like you someday." "You don't want to be like me. You want to be like yourself, but stronger." That's different. It was the same lesson Eliza had learned, standing on that platform at 56, certain her life was over. She hadn't become someone else. She'd become more fully herself, the person she would have been if fear and circumstance hadn't made her small. On her 65th birthday, the community threw a celebration, not just for her birthday, but for everything she'd built. The women's cooperative, the refuge house, the teaching that had touched hundreds of lives. They gathered in the barn Rowan had cleared out and decorated, bringing food and stories and gratitude. Eliza stood before them, older now but stronger in ways that mattered, looked at faces of women she'd taught, women she'd sheltered, women who'd become friends and partners in building something larger than any one person. "I came here with nothing," she said, "and I almost didn't survive. If one man hadn't looked at me and seen worth instead of failure, I'd have died in Wyoming, forgotten and alone. But Rowan gave me a chance, and I took it, built on it, turned one chance into 100 opportunities." She paused, looking at Rowan standing in the back, older too, but still solid, still certain. The lesson isn't that you need someone to save you. The lesson is that sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing you can do. That building something with others is stronger than building it alone. That your worst moment doesn't have to define your whole story. The applause was loud and sustained. But what mattered more to Eliza was what came after. Women approaching with their own stories, their own moments of survival, their own proof that you could start over at any age and build something worth having. That night, lying beside Rowan in the house they'd made together, Eliza felt the profound peace of a life lived honestly. Not perfectly. There had been mistakes, failures, moments of doubt. But honestly, fully. With courage she'd had to learn and strength she'd had to build. "No regrets?" Rowan asked, the same question he'd asked years ago. "None that matter. You?" "Just one. That I didn't meet you sooner. Think of all the time we wasted being alone. We weren't ready sooner. We needed to become who we are before we could build this together." He pulled her close. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been this wise. You're just finally listening." They fell asleep that way, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something beautiful anyway. In the morning there would be work. There was always work. The ranch to run, students to teach, women to shelter, a life to maintain. But for now, there was just this. The warmth of another person who knew all your worst moments and chose to stay anyway. The certainty of a home that belonged to you completely. The knowledge that you'd survived everything that tried to break you and come through stronger. Outside, Wyoming stretched vast and unforgiving under stars that had seen it all. The platform rejection, the desperate nights in the cabin, the building of houses and businesses and lives, the slow transformation from woman discarded to woman essential. The land didn't care about any of it, would outlast all their struggles and triumphs, would still be here long after they were gone. But what they'd built on this land, the refuge, the teaching, the proof that you could start over at any age, that would last too. Not in the physical structures, though those mattered, but in the lives they'd touched, the women who'd learned they were worth fighting for, the partnerships they'd modeled, the courage they'd inspired. Eliza Whitmore had arrived in Wyoming certain her life was over at 56. Eliza Hale knew better now. Life didn't end when circumstances changed. It transformed, became something you couldn't have imagined when you were standing at your lowest point. All you had to do was survive long enough to see it, take the next step even when you couldn't see where it led, accept help when it was offered honestly, build something worth protecting and then protect it fiercely. The rest, the house, the business, the recognition, that was just evidence of the real work. The internal transformation from someone who'd been taught to be small into someone who knew her own worth and demanded others recognize it too. That was the story Eliza would tell if anyone asked. Not rags to riches or mail-order bride to successful businesswoman, but broken woman to whole person, invisible to essential, alone to partnered. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no perfect ending because there was no ending at all, just continuing. More work, more challenges, more moments of doubt mixed with moments of joy. But it was hers. Built from nothing with hands that had never stopped working, courage that had to be relearned daily, and love that had appeared when she'd stopped looking for it. In the harsh Wyoming frontier, where only the strong endured, Eliza had proven something more important than strength. She'd proven that resilience could be learned, that worth could be claimed, that a life could be rebuilt at any age if you were stubborn enough to try, and that ultimately was all any of them could do. Keep trying, keep building, keep choosing courage over fear, partnership over isolation, hope over despair. The morning would come, the work would continue, but tonight, wrapped in the warmth of a life well lived and a love well earned, Eliza let herself rest. She'd earned it.